Before we start, it's a good idea to go to bed and relax. I also want to ask you to subscribe to my channel, like it and write in the comments where you are from and what time it is. Using the link in the description you can support me. Thank you. Sweet dreams. Imagine stepping into a world where every word you speak could end your life. Not metaphorically, literally. This is the world of Emperor Meiji's court in 19th century Japan, a place of rigid hierarchy, hidden dangers, and deadly etiquette. The cherry blossoms outside may sway gently in the spring breeze, but inside the palace walls, a single misstep, an ill-chosen phrase, a hesitant bow, or a glance perceived as disrespect, could cost you your head. In this story, you will live through 33 days of tension, intrigue, and silent terror as if you were an outsider suddenly thrust into the emperor's presence. You will witness ceremonies where one wrong question can trigger whispers that echo all the way to death, corridors lined with guards whose eyes seem to pierce your soul, and nobles who smile while plotting, always calculating who will rise and who will fall. From the moment you step into the palace gates, the world as you know it ends. Words become weapons, silence becomes armor, and even a breath could betray your loyalty. Over the next 33 chapters, you will walk the delicate tightrope of life and death in a court where tradition is law, and the slightest deviation is fatal. Are you ready to survive a day? No. You wouldn't survive a single day. The moment you step through the massive wooden gates of the imperial palace, the air changes. It is no longer the ordinary smell of city streets or the scent of nearby gardens. Here, the air is heavy with incense, lacquer, and an almost tangible tension. Guards in resplendent uniforms stand perfectly still, their eyes trained not just on you, but on every subtle twitch, every shift of weight. One misstep, one hesitation, and they will remember. You are not a guest here. You are an observer, an intruder in a world where every word is measured, every glance scrutinized. The palace itself is a labyrinth of lacquered corridors, sliding doors, and meticulously manicured gardens. Cherry blossoms float lazily in the breeze outside, yet inside, the scent of danger is pervasive, lingering like smoke after a fire. Courtiers pass silently, their sandals making barely a sound on polished wooden floors, their eyes flicking with calculating precision. They smile, they bow, but every smile conceals a potential dagger, every bow hides a trap. An aide approaches, bowing so low that his forehead nearly touches the floor. His voice is polite, clipped, but you catch the underlying tension. "Follow me," he says, each syllable measured. Even the tone of your own voice could betray you here. You nod, trying to mimic the careful composure expected in this court, though inside, your heart races as if it might burst. As you are led deeper into the palace, the walls seem to close in. Tapestries depicting legendary battles and serene landscapes hang like silent witnesses to centuries of history, and centuries of bloodshed. Every corridor is a test, a challenge to your ability to remain unnoticed. Whispers of intrigue and betrayal float through the air. Noblemen exchange secretive glances. Servants carry trays with the precision of soldiers on a parade ground, yet the air is thick with unspoken rules. A single misstep in etiquette could set the court ablaze with rumors, and rumors could end in decapitation. You try to memorize every detail, the exact spacing of the tatami mats, the delicate designs on each sliding door, the faint scent of incense lingering in the corners of each room. Every detail could save you, or betray you. At the center of the palace lies the emperor's audience hall, a cavernous room where the emperor himself might appear at any moment. The walls are lined with polished wood and golden accents, the floor a mirror of perfection. The courtiers' movements are synchronized, almost ritualistic, each gesture a code you have yet to understand. The aide stops suddenly. "Here," he whispers, and gestures toward a smaller waiting room. You enter, the door sliding silently behind you. You are alone for a brief moment, yet even in solitude, you feel observed. Perhaps it is the weight of history, or perhaps it is something more sinister, the invisible eyes of the palace, the ever-present specter of judgment. You breathe slowly, trying to calm the panic rising within. But your pulse betrays you. You are aware that in mere moments, someone might enter this room and demand an explanation for your presence. What are you doing here? Why should the Emperor allow your intrusion? In this court, answers are not enough, they must be perfect, flawless, convincing. One misworded sentence could spell the end. Outside, the soft rustling of silk announces the arrival of someone approaching. A guard bows, then steps aside. A noblewoman passes, her expression serene, yet her eyes seem to pierce through you. You are acutely aware of every inch of space, every shift of posture. Nothing is accidental here. Every detail is scrutinized, catalogued, judged. You realize, with a chilling clarity, that the world you have known, the world of casual words, of careless gestures, is over. In Emperor Meiji's court, survival is an art, and you have just begun to learn the rules. A servant knocks lightly, and a voice calls out from beyond the sliding door. Prepare yourself. He will see you shortly. You nod, swallowing hard. The cherry blossoms outside do not comfort you. They are a reminder that life continues outside these walls, but here, every second is a test. And already, you understand the terrifying truth: you would not survive a day in this palace. Not one day. The room feels smaller now that you are alone, the silence pressing against your eardrums. Your pulse pounds in your temples as you sit on the low, polished floor, the tatami beneath you almost unbearably rigid. Time stretches, each second an eternity, as you wait for the next moment that could decide your fate. Outside, the muted shuffling of feet continues, a soft rhythm, almost hypnotic, that seems to underscore the gravity of your presence. You imagine the courtiers walking the long corridors, exchanging subtle signals that could determine life or death. You are a newcomer, uninitiated, and yet you are being weighed. Every gesture, every twitch, every breath matters here. You try to steady yourself, adjusting your posture, keeping your hands flat against the tatami, palms down to show deference. You must appear calm, composed, and worthy of being noticed only as a silent observer, not as a threat. A faint sound catches your attention, the sliding of a door, the soft whisper of silk. You glance toward it, heart hammering, but you see only a servant carrying a tray of tea. Even this mundane task carries a sense of ritual. The tea is poured with precision, every movement deliberate. You realize, with growing unease, that this is a palace where nothing is accidental. Nothing escapes scrutiny. Minutes crawl by, though you cannot be sure if it is minutes or hours. The mind begins to play tricks, inventing threats where there are none. Shadows cast by the paper screen seem to shift like specters. The slightest creak of wood makes you start, every sound amplified by fear. You are hyper-aware of your surroundings, the smell of lacquer, the faint scent of sandalwood, the delicate hum of distant conversation. Then a voice interrupts your thoughts, calm but commanding. You are ready. It is low, almost casual, yet it carries a weight that presses down on your chest. You nod, though you are unsure whether you have the right answer. The aide reappears, bowing slightly, and gestures for you to follow. As you move through the corridors, the palace seems to expand and contract simultaneously. You are acutely aware of every detail, the polished wooden beams, the intricate carvings, the glimmer of gold leaf catching the dim light. Courtiers pass without acknowledgement, their faces serene, masks hiding whatever thoughts flicker behind their eyes. You imagine the countless intrigues, betrayals, and secret alliances that this palace has witnessed over decades. Every one of these people could be silently judging you, waiting for a single misstep to justify an accusation. You are led into a larger hall, but you do not see the emperor yet. The room is vast, lined with columns, and every inch of floor is polished to a mirror-like sheen. At the far end, a raised platform hints at where the emperor will appear. Courtiers line the walls, sitting in precise formation, their hands resting lightly on their knees, faces impassive. Some glance at you briefly, enough to unsettle, then look away, as if they have seen countless others like you and already know your fate. The aide leans close, whispering, "Remain silent. Speak only when spoken to." A single wrong word can be fatal. You swallow hard. You think you understand, yet the enormity of it presses down on you. Words, so often trivial in your ordinary life, have become weapons here, and even a well-intentioned phrase could be twisted into a reason for execution. Your eyes scan the hall, trying to memorize the faces and positions of each courtier. You notice subtle signs of hierarchy, the slight inclination of heads, the careful folding of sleeves, the gentle tapping of sandals. Every gesture is a language of power, a silent negotiation that could mean the difference between survival and death. You realize you will need to learn this language quickly, or risk losing everything in an instant. As you settle into the far corner of the hall, the doors at the end slowly open. Light spills in, and with it comes the unmistakable weight of presence. The Emperor is coming. You can feel it before you see him, a ripple of authority that moves through the room, demanding recognition. Every person straightens, every movement becomes more deliberate, and a hush falls over the hall. Even your own breath seems loud in comparison. A single moment passes. Then another. And you understand, with chilling clarity, that this is only the beginning. In Emperor Meiji's court, waiting is its own form of torture. Time stretches, each second a reminder that a careless thought, a twitch, or a glance could betray your intentions and end your life. Your heart races, your muscles tense, and your mind begins rehearsing the words you might never speak. One thing is certain, the palace does not forgive. It does not forget. And it certainly does not allow mistakes. The doors at the far end of the hall glide open silently, revealing a figure that seems impossibly small yet commands the attention of every person in the room. Emperor Meiji steps into the hall, moving with deliberate grace. His robes are a cascade of colors, muted but rich, embroidered with intricate patterns that catch the light in fleeting flashes. Yet it is not the clothing that arrests your attention, it is the presence. Authority radiates from him like heat from a furnace, you feel it even from the farthest corner of the room. A hush falls so complete that the faintest creak of the polished floorboards echoes like a gunshot. Every courtier freezes in position, hands on knees, eyes lowered or fixed on precise points in the hall. You try to mimic the posture, bowing slightly, feeling the weight of tradition press on your shoulders. The Emperor's gaze sweeps across the room with effortless control, and for an instant, you are certain he has noticed you. Your stomach tightens. You are not supposed to stand out. Every syllable you might speak in the coming moments must be measured with meticulous care. He moves toward the raised platform at the far end of the hall. The courtiers follow with their eyes, their expressions unreadable. There is a rhythm to the room now, a silent choreography of power, submission, and observation. You wonder how many have failed here, how many lives have ended with a single misstep. The thought sends a shiver down your spine. Suddenly, a courtier kneels before the Emperor, speaking in a soft, measured tone. You strain to hear, trying to catch a word, any hint of what might be required of you. The Emperor nods once, sharply, and the courtier bows again, retreating to his position. Every gesture seems deliberate, calculated, and yet fluid, as though the dance of authority and obedience is as natural as breathing. You glance around, noticing the subtleties in everyone's behavior. Some whisper to each other with voices so low you cannot hear them, their eyes flicking toward the Emperor as if to gauge his reaction. Others maintain perfect stillness, though their fingers tremble ever so slightly. You realize that, in this court, power is measured not by force, but by the precision with which one follows, or manipulates, the rules. Then, the Emperor's eyes settle briefly on you. It is a glance so fleeting you wonder if it was imagined, yet the sensation of being seen lingers long after. You feel a jolt of fear, your mind racing to compose a demeanor of absolute calm. In this place, your face betrays you more than your words ever could. You straighten your back, lower your gaze slightly, and remind yourself that breathing is allowed, barely. A servant steps forward, carrying a tray with a ceremonial object. The Emperor reaches for it, and you notice how even this mundane action is imbued with ritual significance. One wrong motion, one hesitation, and disaster could follow. You remember the aide's words, a single wrong word can be fatal. And you understand that the same applies to gestures, glances, even your posture. Time stretches in slow, almost unbearable increments. You focus on every detail, the precise angle of the emperor's hands, the subtle shift in his stance, the way light reflects off the polished floor. Each observation feels like a clue in a puzzle you have no right to solve, yet must understand if you are to survive. You are a spectator in a theater where the stakes are unimaginably high, and the script is unwritten. The emperor speaks, his voice calm but carrying an authority that seems to resonate through the walls themselves. The courtiers respond with perfect synchronicity, their voices blending into a harmonious cadence of obedience and protocol. You dare not move, not even to breathe too audibly. Even the air seems charged with expectation. As the audience proceeds, you realize something chilling: this is not merely a ceremony. It is a test, a demonstration of who belongs and who does not. Every nuance matters. Every blink, every pause, every subtle inflection is recorded in the invisible ledger of the court. You are acutely aware of your outsider status, the fragile thread of your life suspended above the polished floors. Your heartbeat thunders in your chest. Each second is an eternity. Every detail becomes monumental. And as you observe, as you struggle to remain composed, a realization takes hold with icy clarity: in Emperor Meiji's court, even being unseen is an achievement. Speaking recklessly is death. Thinking too loudly is danger. And surviving, truly surviving, requires mastering a language older than words, a language written in posture, glance, and silence. And already, without a word having been spoken to you, you know that one day here is far too long. You would not survive. The emperor's presence slowly recedes as he moves down the hall, attended by courtiers whose movements are flawless in their precision. Yet even as he departs, the air remains heavy with tension. You sense that the danger does not leave with him. In fact, it seems to thicken, settling into the corners of the hall, hiding behind the smiles and polite bows of the courtiers. You are not merely a visitor here, you are a potential pawn, a curiosity, and possibly a threat. The room now buzzes with quiet murmurs. Courtiers exchange barely audible words, their glances sharp, calculated. You strain to listen, but the Japanese is subtle, layered with meaning, and unfamiliar to you. Still, the tone is unmistakable: there is discussion about you. Speculation. Assessment. Even the faintest misstep in understanding could brand you as reckless or insolent. A noblewoman seated nearby shifts ever so slightly, her eyes catching yours for a fleeting instant. It is not a friendly gesture. You sense calculation behind her gaze, a weighing of potential usefulness or danger. In this court, a glance is more than communication, it is judgment. One misread signal, one faltering interpretation, and you risk exposure. You force yourself to remain perfectly still, heart hammering, palms pressed lightly against the tatami. A young courtier approaches, his head bowed, careful to maintain the exact angle required. He carries a small document, and as he hands it to a senior official, you notice the barely perceptible trembling of his fingers. Perhaps he has been here before, perhaps not. Either way, the consequences of error are evident in the tenseness of his posture. You realize that everyone here walks a razor-thin line, balancing respect, protocol, and fear. Your mind races. You try to memorize every subtle sign of rank and allegiance. Who is influential? Who is cunning? Who smiles while plotting another's downfall? The palace is a living organism of intrigue, and you are a foreign particle suddenly injected into its delicate ecosystem. Even your breathing feels conspicuous, each inhalation a potential betrayal of your composure. Then, a servant glides past, carrying a tray of sweets. The gesture seems innocent enough, yet you notice the faint tension in her shoulders, the slight avoidance of eye contact with certain courtiers. Every movement has significance, you realize. Even the casual act of walking down a corridor is laden with meaning. Misstep once, and you could inadvertently offend someone with the power to orchestrate your removal from this world. A soft chuckle from the far end of the hall freezes you in place. A nobleman leans slightly, speaking in hushed tones to his neighbor. You catch a fragment, the stranger, dangerous if naive. It is enough to confirm your fears. You are being evaluated, your every gesture noted, and the verdict could come at any moment. The air is thick with hidden tension, as though invisible threads connect everyone in the room to one another, and to you. Hours, or perhaps only minutes, pass in this suspended state. You are aware that any outward sign of impatience or confusion could be fatal. Even the slightest facial expression must be controlled, every muscle under perfect command. You remind yourself to breathe evenly, but the rhythm of your heartbeat is deafening. Then, the senior official who received the young courtier's document shifts his gaze in your direction. He does not speak, but the intensity of his scrutiny is enough to make you feel exposed, naked in a world where clothing and posture define everything. You bow slightly, though unsure if it is sufficient or excessive. In this court, precision is life, and even a correct gesture performed incorrectly can be a death sentence. From the corner of your eye, you notice another nobleman whispering to the courtier next to him. Their eyes flick toward you repeatedly, each glance sharpened with suspicion and curiosity. You realize that your presence has already become a topic of conversation, that every second adds weight to the assessment being made. The emperor's watchful gaze may have left the hall, but the eyes of the court remain, ever vigilant, ever calculating. You take a shallow breath, steadying yourself. Your mind races with strategies for survival, but you know instinct alone will not suffice. You must learn the unspoken rules, the intricate choreography of power, respect, and fear. You must navigate the subtle currents of influence that swirl invisibly around the hall. And above all, you must remain unseen while observing everything, because here, knowledge is survival, and ignorance is death. The court continues its rituals, seemingly mundane to any outsider, but to you, each movement, each gesture, each whispered word is a coded message. You are beginning to understand the terrifying truth, even in moments of apparent calm, danger lurks. And every day in this palace is a tightrope walk over a pit that has claimed countless lives. You shift slightly, careful not to draw attention. The words of the aide echo in your mind, a single wrong word can be fatal. And you realize, with a chill that sinks to your bones, that here, it is not only words, every breath, every glance, every thought matters. You are surrounded by invisible daggers, and they are all pointed at you. The day drags on with an almost unbearable slowness, each moment a test of composure. You remain in your corner of the hall, acutely aware of every movement, every flicker of an eye, every whispered word. The courtiers continue their careful dance, but now you begin to notice something more sinister, subtle maneuvers, the invisible jockeying for position, hints of grudges that have festered for years. You realize, with dawning horror, that your presence alone has upset a delicate balance. A young nobleman seated nearby tilts his head slightly toward the courtier next to him, whispering just loud enough for you to catch fragments. Stranger, must not be allowed, unprepared, the words slice through the tense air. You sense the implications, you are being watched not only for etiquette but for potential threat. The palace has no tolerance for outsiders who might disrupt the equilibrium, even unintentionally. You try to remain calm, but your pulse quickens. Every heartbeat is a drum in the silent hall, a loud announcement of your presence. You shift minutely, careful to make it seem natural, but the movement seems exaggerated under the court's scrutinizing gaze. A faint sneer from a middle-ranking noble catches your attention. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, but you feel the intent, a challenge, a test, perhaps even a threat. Suddenly, one of the senior courtiers rises, his movements fluid and precise. He approaches the center of the hall, and you immediately feel the collective focus of the court tighten like a noose. When he stops, everyone, including you, is frozen in silent attention. The nobleman casts a glance in your direction, longer than necessary. You know that this is no mere observation. The assessment is underway. The aide who brought you here whispers, "Do not speak unless spoken to. And even then, choose your words carefully." You nod, trying to mask your rising panic. But you realize the aide's warning is not just about etiquette, it is about survival. The palace is a battlefield disguised as ritual, and you have entered as a vulnerable outsider. A sudden movement draws your attention. The young nobleman who had whispered earlier subtly leans closer to another courtier, speaking under his breath. Their eyes flick toward you repeatedly, measuring, calculating. You feel the tension coil around your chest, your stomach twisting. You are being judged, dissected by invisible hands, and the verdict could come swiftly. Then, the first direct test arrives. A courtier steps forward and, with a faintly mocking smile, addresses you in polite but pointed language. You are far from home, are you not? The question seems innocuous, yet you feel the trap immediately. A wrong response, hesitation, or misplaced gesture could mark you as disrespectful, naive, or deceitful. Every syllable must be weighed carefully. You choose your words with extreme caution, bowing slightly as you respond. The reply is factual, neutral, designed to reveal nothing of fear, ignorance, or naivety. The courtier nods slowly, lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, the tension eases slightly, but you know better than to relax. You have passed the first test, but it is only the beginning. From across the hall, another nobleman watches you with sharp, calculating eyes. You feel the weight of his scrutiny and the invisible threat it carries. In this palace, enemies are not announced, they lurk behind smiles, whispered words, and subtle glances. The first danger has been identified, and it is clear, if you make another mistake, there will be no second chance. Your senses sharpen. You notice the faintest shifts in posture, the delicate folding of sleeves, the slight turn of a head. Each motion, each gesture, is a signal in a language you are only beginning to comprehend. The palace is alive with silent battles, and you are now unwillingly a player in a deadly game. You take a controlled breath, reminding yourself to remain calm, to observe, and to survive. Every word, every glance, every movement is now a calculation. One slip, one unguarded expression, and the whispers around you could grow into accusations that end in a sudden, irrevocable punishment. As the afternoon progresses, you realize the terrifying truth. In Emperor Meiji's court, the first threats are not announced with swords or loud voices. They arrive quietly, subtly, woven into the fabric of every interaction. And now, fully immersed in this world of silent peril, you understand that surviving even a single day requires mastering an art that outsiders are never meant to learn. The day continues, and the court's subtle hostility becomes more palpable. You are not merely a guest, you are an experiment, a challenge, a target. And somewhere, behind polite smiles and ritualistic movements, the first daggers of intent have already been thrown. As the day drags on, you begin to sense the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that underpins the palace. Nothing here is accidental. Every bow, every glance, every whispered exchange is a calculated move in a game you barely understand. The young nobleman who had whispered earlier seems to be testing you still, his eyes flicking toward you with every subtle gesture, measuring your reactions, waiting for a sign of weakness. A senior courtier leans toward another, whispering in a tone too soft for casual ears but audible to those trained in observation. Their conversation is layered, coded. You catch fragments, new arrival, potential threat, watch carefully, and your stomach twists with realization. They are plotting, silently, using words as weapons. Even your mere presence has sparked a strategy session among these masters of subtlety. You glance around the hall, noticing small shifts in posture, the precise spacing between courtiers, the slight inclination of heads, each detail carries meaning. Some positions indicate favor, others suspicion. You try to memorize it all, knowing that understanding this invisible language could mean the difference between survival and a fatal misstep. Suddenly, the young nobleman moves closer, kneeling slightly forward as if to examine something on the tatami in front of him. His gaze flicks up toward you, and for a heartbeat, you think he will speak. You remain perfectly still, heart pounding. A single word here could be a test or a trap. He smiles faintly, an expression that could be genuine or poisonous, then retreats, leaving you in a state of tense uncertainty. A sense of foreboding settles over you. Every interaction is now layered with risk. The palace has rules unspoken, rules that are enforced with silent efficiency. Even courtiers who appear friendly might be setting a trap. Alliances shift like shadows, loyalty is a currency traded carefully. You realize that simply surviving requires not just knowledge, but intuition honed to a razor edge. From across the hall, a noblewoman directs her attention toward you, her eyes narrowing slightly. She whispers to a courtier next to her, and they exchange a barely perceptible nod. You feel the weight of her gaze, a silent warning, a subtle challenge. In this court, enemies are not obvious. They smile, bow, and speak in tones of courtesy, all while weaving plots designed to ensnare the unwary. The aide who brought you here remains close, though unseen by others. He whispers reminders, observe everything. Speak nothing. Your life depends on discretion. You nod silently, though your mind reels. Every second brings new information, but also new danger. Misinterpretation could be fatal. Even understanding the intentions of the courtiers requires careful observation, an almost supernatural attention to nuance. As the emperor's presence becomes a memory, the court's hidden currents grow stronger. You notice subtle groupings forming, small clusters of courtiers exchanging glances, whispers, and gestures. You are keenly aware that some are plotting, perhaps against each other, perhaps against you. Survival depends on reading these invisible signals accurately. Misreading them could mean not only humiliation but death. A sudden movement catches your eye, a young page carrying a scroll slips, almost imperceptibly, but the misstep is noticed. The nobleman nearest to him raises an eyebrow, and the page freezes, aware of the silent judgment. You see the tension radiating outward, understanding that even minor errors are magnified in this palace, transformed into tests of worth, loyalty, and skill. You begin to realize the terrifying scope of what you are facing. This is more than a palace, it is a battlefield of subtleties, a place where knowledge is lethal, and ignorance is fatal. Survival is not a matter of courage alone, it requires the ability to read invisible currents, anticipate invisible threats, and respond with precision. One wrong glance, one careless thought, and the court could turn against you without a word spoken. Your pulse quickens. The web of intrigue is tightening, and you are at its center, exposed, observed, and vulnerable. You remind yourself to breathe, to stay silent, to remain alert. The palace is patient. Its tests are slow, deliberate, and merciless. And already, you feel the unmistakable weight of the first real threats bearing down on you. You have survived the initial scrutiny, but the game has only just begun. Each passing moment brings new danger, new calculations, new whispers in the shadows. In Emperor Meiji's court, even surviving a day is a challenge of unimaginable complexity, and you are just beginning to understand the rules. The tension in the hall is palpable, almost suffocating. Even with the emperor absent, his authority lingers, a silent force that shapes every movement, every word. You realize that the courtiers are no longer merely observing, they are maneuvering. Alliances shift like invisible currents, and you are now in the middle of a game whose rules you barely understand. From across the hall, the young nobleman who had whispered before makes his first move. He leans slightly, tilts his head, and mutters a phrase to his companion, loud enough for you to catch fragments. Stranger must be tested, see if worthy. You feel a cold wave of realization. This is not idle speculation. They are plotting a test, and you are the target. One misstep could ignite suspicion, turning silent curiosity into deadly attention. You adjust your posture, trying to appear calm while your mind races. Every micro-movement is now under scrutiny. A tremor in your hand, the way you shift your gaze, the slight hesitation in your breathing, all could be interpreted as weakness. You remind yourself of the aide's warning, observe everything. Speak nothing. Your life depends on discretion. These are not mere precautions, they are commandments for survival. Suddenly, a senior courtier approaches, moving with deliberate grace. He stops a few paces from you and studies you with a faintly curious expression. You hold your breath, trying to appear neutral. The slightest twitch of facial muscles could be interpreted as arrogance or fear, and both carry consequences. He bows subtly, then leans in, speaking in a tone polite but laden with meaning. "You are far from home," he says, his voice smooth, controlled, yet heavy with insinuation. You nod, offering a carefully measured response, neutral and precise. The words feel foreign as they leave your mouth, but you manage to maintain composure. The courtier's eyes narrow just slightly, a signal you are unsure how to interpret. Perhaps you have passed the first test, or perhaps this is only the beginning. In this palace, the line between success and doom is razor-thin. A whisper reaches your ear from behind, a servant, barely audible, muttering a warning, "Do not trust gestures, nor smiles. They conceal daggers." The words send a shiver down your spine. You glance around, noting every glance, every tilt of the head, every subtle shift in posture. The web of intrigue is tightening. You are the newcomer, the outsider, and already, invisible threads of suspicion begin to coil around you. From the far end of the hall, the young noblewoman who had been observing you earlier moves closer. Her movements are graceful, calculated, as if rehearsed 1,000 times. She positions herself so her gaze meets yours briefly, then looks away, a subtle signal that could be interpreted in countless ways. You understand immediately, her role is to unsettle you, to test your reactions, and to report back to others who will decide your fate. The hall itself seems to respond to these interactions. The polished floorboards amplify every step, the faint rustle of silk emphasizes each gesture. You notice the positioning of every courtier, the space they maintain from each other, and the subtle micro-expressions that convey intent without a single word. This is a court where knowledge of etiquette is a matter of life or death, where misreading even a tiny signal could be fatal. Your heartbeat echoes in your ears. You try to calm yourself, focusing on your breathing, on the neutral expression you must maintain. But awareness alone is not enough. You realize that surviving requires action, yet every action is fraught with danger. Even observing too intently could be interpreted as insolence. Even silence could be suspicion. Suddenly, a document is presented to a senior official. The way it is handled, the precise tilt of the head, the careful folding of sleeves, each gesture is a test, a demonstration of subtle power. You realize that your presence has already influenced these rituals. You are now part of the game, whether you like it or not. As the court proceeds with measured precision, you feel the first real sense of peril. The courtiers are no longer just watching, they are plotting, testing, maneuvering, and positioning themselves in relation to you. You are acutely aware that a single false move, a misinterpreted gesture, or an ill-timed glance could shift the balance against you. The day stretches on, each hour heavier than the last. You are learning, observing, surviving, but the price of error is etched clearly in the subtle glances, whispered words, and slight inclinations of heads around you. One thing is certain, in Emperor Meiji's court, even the act of existing is a dangerous challenge. And now, the first moves have been made against you. The subtle threats that had hovered at the edge of your awareness now begin to take shape. No longer are they whispers or glances that could be dismissed as coincidence, they are deliberate, targeted, and unmistakable. You notice the young nobleman from earlier moving closer to the center of the hall, his eyes scanning the courtiers and briefly resting on you with a faint, calculating smile. It is no longer casual observation. You are now under active scrutiny. A hush falls over the room as a senior courtier steps forward, addressing the assembly in measured tones. The words are ceremonial, but you detect an undercurrent of challenge. The courtier is announcing a subtle test, a demonstration of skill, knowledge, and loyalty, one that will inevitably involve you. Every movement, every gesture, every breath is being analyzed. The very act of existing in this space is now a test. You glance around, trying to memorize positions, postures, and potential allies. But there are no allies here, at least none visible. Everyone operates in a delicate balance of self-interest and duty. The noblewoman who had been observing you before shifts slightly, her smile polite but cold. You sense the invisible knife she wields, the power of influence, the threat of manipulation, the ability to turn the court against you with nothing more than a word whispered at the right moment. The aide who brought you here leans closer, whispering urgently, "Watch them. Every movement tells a story. You must anticipate, react, survive." You nod, though your heart pounds. You are learning, but the stakes are already terrifyingly high. A single error could end everything. The young nobleman makes a subtle gesture, a tilt of the head, a flicker of the eyes, and several courtiers shift accordingly. You realize with chilling clarity that you are the target of a coordinated observation. Every person in the hall is participating in an intricate game, and you are the unknown variable. One wrong move, one misstep, and the entire assembly could turn against you. Your pulse accelerates as a page enters, carrying a small ceremonial item. The positioning is precise, almost theatrical, but you recognize it for what it is, a signal. The courtiers who notice it nod subtly, acknowledging a hidden protocol. You, however, are unfamiliar with these codes. Misinterpreting them could be disastrous. You force yourself to remain calm, to study, to memorize. A sudden shift draws your attention. A nobleman rises slowly, his posture perfect, eyes sweeping across the hall until they settle briefly on you. He steps forward, his intentions unreadable but unmistakably focused on you. The tension in the room spikes. Every heartbeat feels amplified, every breath a potential misstep. You realize that this is the first time a direct threat has been leveled in your direction, not by sword, but by influence, authority, and cunning. Your mind races to calculate potential responses. Bow slightly. Speak nothing. Attempt neutrality. Every option carries risk. You recognize the terrifying efficiency of the palace. Words can be twisted, actions misread, intentions manipulated. Even hesitation could be perceived as defiance. The nobleman stops a few paces from you, his expression neutral, yet you feel the latent danger radiating from him. He speaks softly, enough that only you can hear. Not everyone who enters survives their first day. Remember this. His words are polite, almost courteous, but the underlying threat is unmistakable. You swallow hard, nod, and force your face into a mask of calm, though your stomach churns. Behind him, the rest of the court watches, eyes sharp and calculating. You understand now that the test is ongoing, and that your every micro-expression will be observed, analyzed, and judged. Even the emperor's absence does not lessen the stakes. In this court, authority is diffuse and deadly, power is wielded through observation, whispers, and the careful manipulation of perception. You glance toward the aide for guidance, but he remains silent, his eyes wary. The unspoken message is clear: you are on your own. Survival depends on reading the currents of intrigue, anticipating moves before they are made, and responding with the precision of someone who has spent a lifetime in this deadly dance. The room seems to shrink around you, every wall closing in as invisible threads of danger tighten. You are acutely aware of every breath, every blink, every movement. And as the nobleman returns to his position, satisfied with the subtle test he has enacted, you realize that you have been thrust into a battlefield where words are weapons, glances are daggers, and survival is never guaranteed. The palace, once a place of ceremonial beauty, now feels like a trap, a cage of elegance and menace. You are trapped in the heart of a game you did not ask to play, and one truth becomes terrifyingly clear: here, visibility equals vulnerability, and you are now fully visible. The invisible tension that had been simmering throughout the hall now begins to manifest in small, deliberate actions aimed squarely at you. The young nobleman who had been watching you earlier shifts slightly, adjusting his posture with meticulous precision. His eyes find yours once again, and this time the glance carries something more: an unspoken challenge. You feel the weight of expectation pressing down, like a physical force. From across the hall, another courtier, a man whose reputation for cunning precedes him, leans toward a companion and murmurs something barely audible. Test his manners, expose his ignorance, you catch enough of the phrase to understand that the scrutiny is intensifying. This is no longer a casual observation, your behavior is now actively being probed. You attempt to remain perfectly still, aware that every muscle in your body is under silent surveillance. One misstep, a twitch of a finger, a shift in gaze, a hesitant breath, could be twisted into a sign of insolence or fear. Even your silence is being judged, and every hesitation is catalogued by the eyes around you. The palace is alive with observation, and you are the subject of a covert experiment in protocol, composure, and perception. A page enters, carrying a scroll, and you notice the careful choreography of the hands, the tilt of the head, the subtle alignment of feet. These are not casual gestures, they are the language of the court, a code of signals, and you must interpret them without error. Misreading these cues could lead to humiliation, or worse. Then the young noblewoman who had been observing you earlier approaches, her silk robes whispering with every step. She pauses just within your line of sight, glancing down at the floor as if to measure something invisible, then looks up, her eyes locking briefly with yours. There is a challenge in that glance, a subtle assertion of authority, an unspoken test. You realize she is gauging not just your reaction, but your composure under pressure. A faint stir runs through the assembly. Courtiers begin subtle movements, slight shifts in posture, near imperceptible exchanges of glances. You recognize the signs now, they are setting the stage for the first test of your presence here. It is indirect, yet unavoidable. One wrong move, one misjudged glance, could result in social or political injury, or worse. The aide who brought you here whispers softly, observe everything, anticipate their moves. Respond only when necessary. You nod, though your hands tremble slightly despite your efforts to control them. You feel as if every breath you take is being catalogued, each blink weighed against the code of the court. The first deliberate probe comes from a nobleman seated near the center. He tilts his head, smiling faintly, and speaks in a tone that seems casual but is loaded with nuance. A visitor from afar must surely find our customs perplexing. His eyes flick toward you, testing, waiting. You feel the trap instinctively. A naive response could expose your ignorance or disrespect, hesitation could be seen as defiance. You bow slightly, choosing your words with care, neutral, respectful, revealing nothing about your thoughts or fears. The nobleman nods slowly, lips pressed in a thin line, and retreats. The tension does not ease, you realize you have survived the first subtle challenge, but only barely. The palace does not forgive, nor does it forget. From the corners of the hall, you notice whispers, barely audible but deliberate. Every shift of a shoulder, every tilt of a head, every subtle movement contributes to a silent assessment of your worthiness. The young nobleman and noblewoman are clearly coordinating, testing your reactions through indirect challenges, measuring your composure, judgment, and instinct. You understand now that survival here requires more than knowledge of etiquette. It requires anticipation, intuition, and a nearly preternatural awareness of hidden threats. The first direct challenges have been set, subtle yet unmistakable, and you are acutely aware that each moment must be navigated with care. One misstep, one unguarded reaction, and the court could turn against you before you have the chance to defend yourself. The room hums with quiet power, the invisible tension growing heavier with every passing minute. You are caught in the midst of a web you barely understand, observed, tested, and manipulated. And as you brace for the next subtle assault, one thought seizes your mind with chilling clarity: you are not merely a guest in Emperor Meiji's court, you are a target. The subtle tests of etiquette and perception soon escalate into deliberate maneuvers designed to unsettle you. Courtiers move with deliberate slowness, eyes flicking toward you and then away, murmuring phrases you cannot fully catch but whose intent is unmistakable. You are being evaluated, weighed, and judged. Every gesture, every breath, every micro-expression is now under scrutiny. A young nobleman steps forward, bowing slightly as if to consult with another courtier, yet his gaze lingers on you. There is no overt threat, but the implication is clear: your reactions are being monitored, recorded, and interpreted. You sense a growing anticipation among the courtiers, a collective patience that is frightening in its precision. The palace itself seems to lean in, holding its breath, watching to see how you will respond. The noble woman from before glides closer, her movements measured and silent, like a shadow moving through sunlight. She pauses, tilts her head, and fixes her eyes on you for a heartbeat longer than polite custom allows. The subtle challenge in her gaze is undeniable. She is testing your composure, waiting for a flicker of fear, a hesitation in posture, or a poorly chosen expression. You force yourself to remain calm, controlling every muscle, every flicker of emotion. Whispers rise softly among the assembly. You catch fragments, must see his understanding, observe his behavior, they are orchestrating a coordinated assessment. You are the focal point, a subject in a carefully calculated experiment of courtly dominance and etiquette. One wrong glance, one poorly judged gesture, and the consequences could be severe. A page enters, carrying a ceremonial item. The positioning of his hands, the angle of his feet, the tilt of his head, all are deliberate. Courtiers nod subtly as he passes, acknowledging his skillful execution of the ritual. You realize with a shiver that the same scrutiny is now being applied to you. You are expected to observe, understand, and react with flawless precision. Any misstep, however minor, could mark you as incompetent, or worse. The aide leans close, whispering, "Patience. Observe. Respond only when necessary." The first true test is approaching. You nod, your heart hammering, aware that the words are not just guidance, they are a lifeline. You are learning quickly, but the stakes are enormous. Suddenly, a senior courtier directs attention toward you, his smile polite but sharp. "Your understanding of our customs must be precise," he says, voice calm yet edged with implication. His eyes flick toward the assembly, and you realize this is not a simple question, it is a test. Every person in the hall is watching for even the slightest sign of hesitation, ignorance, or disrespect. You respond carefully, bowing slightly and choosing your words with painstaking precision. The reply is neutral, factual, and respectful. The courtier nods slowly, expression unreadable, and steps back. You breathe a silent sigh of relief, but only briefly. You know that the test is not over. The courtiers are patient, they will probe again and again, testing endurance, composure, and subtle understanding. Across the hall, the noblewoman whispers something to the young nobleman, their eyes flicking toward you in tandem. You feel the invisible pressure of coordinated observation, the silent force of the court pressing in from all sides. Even a micro-expression could be noted and analyzed, becoming the basis for judgment. You realize the danger is not only in words but in posture, glance, and hesitation. Your mind races, calculating potential moves, anticipating subtle threats, and evaluating responses. Survival requires more than etiquette, it demands instinct, intuition, and almost preternatural awareness. The palace is a battlefield, and you are in the center, exposed, vulnerable, and observed from every angle. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours. Every subtle gesture from a courtier is a challenge, every whispered word a potential trap. You understand now that this is only the beginning, the true tests, the deliberate probes into your behavior and judgment, will continue for as long as you remain in the palace. You are learning, adapting, surviving, but the stakes could not be higher. In Emperor Meiji's court, the line between life and death is written not with swords, but with glances, whispers, and invisible daggers of protocol. You are at the mercy of their observation, and one misstep could undo everything. The day drags on, and you realize the horrifying truth: in this palace, even surviving an hour is a challenge, and surviving the next will require every ounce of cunning, composure, and intuition you can summon. The game has begun, and you are now a player. The quiet tension in the hall begins to ripple into the first overt maneuvers. What had been subtle glances and whispered words now escalates into deliberate actions aimed at testing your resolve. The courtier's polite composure masks an undercurrent of hostility, and you feel, for the first time, the tangible threat of open conflict. The young nobleman who has been observing you all day steps forward again, this time with purpose. He does not speak, yet the tilt of his head, the calculated flicker of his eyes, and the precision of his movements broadcast a silent challenge to the assembly: this stranger must be measured. His reaction will determine his place, or lack thereof. You realize that you are now the central figure in a subtle confrontation, and every motion is being analyzed. Across the hall, the noblewoman leans slightly toward another courtier, whispering, her eyes repeatedly flicking to you. Her expression is a careful mask of politeness, yet you sense the barely concealed mockery and judgment. It is clear that she is orchestrating a subtle test, one designed to expose hesitation, error, or ignorance. Survival will require perfect composure, flawless observation, and immediate, precise responses. A page enters carrying a ceremonial object, moving with impeccable grace. Courtiers nod ever so slightly, acknowledging the display. You realize with dread that this, too, is a test aimed at you, to see if you notice, to see if you react, and to see if you interpret the signals correctly. Every second is now a potential trap, and even the act of observation itself carries risk. The aide leans close, whispering softly, patience. Observe. Every action has meaning. Respond only when necessary. One mistake can undo everything. His words are urgent, yet controlled, and they underscore the deadly precision required in this environment. You nod, aware that his advice is your lifeline. Suddenly, the young nobleman moves closer to the center of the hall and gestures subtly toward you. The assembly reacts almost imperceptibly, shifting slightly, their postures minutely altered. You feel the invisible pressure mounting, like air thickening around your chest. A test is underway, and you are the unwilling participant. A courtier at the far end of the room speaks quietly, his words carried under the surface of polite conversation. Observe him carefully, test his comprehension. You catch enough to understand that your understanding, or lack thereof, is being scrutinized. You are acutely aware that even a subtle misinterpretation could mark you as incompetent, naive, or disrespectful. Your heart pounds as you maintain perfect composure, controlling every muscle and micro-expression. You sense the courtiers watching not just your gestures but your very thoughts, your internal calculations. They will interpret hesitation as weakness, uncertainty as arrogance, and subtle mistakes as insolence. You are a foreigner, an intruder in a precise and unforgiving system, and the first conflicts have now made their presence unmistakable. The noblewoman approaches, her movements deliberate, her eyes locking with yours for a heartbeat longer than etiquette permits. She whispers a comment to a nearby courtier, their heads inclined toward each other in silent consultation. You feel the invisible web of intrigue tighten. It is now no longer theoretical, your presence has provoked action. The first targeted maneuvers against you are underway, subtle but deliberate. A sudden shift in the assembly sends a chill down your spine. The courtiers are beginning to coordinate openly, a network of observation and subtle influence. The young nobleman nods slightly, the noblewoman adjusts her position, and other courtiers respond in kind. Every glance, every movement, every gesture has been designed to test, unsettle, and measure you. You understand, with an icy clarity, that survival in this palace is not merely about etiquette. It is about anticipating moves, reading invisible currents, and acting with flawless timing. One misstep, one poorly judged reaction, and the court could converge against you without hesitation. The air feels charged, thick with anticipation, as the first real conflicts of observation, influence, and judgment unfold. You are no longer just a guest, you are a player in a dangerous game where every move is watched, every glance assessed, and every reaction interpreted. And for the first time, you realize just how high the stakes are. One miscalculation, one error, and your presence in Emperor Meiji's court could end in humiliation, or worse. By midday, the court's calm veneer begins to crack. You realize that the subtle tests have now evolved into deliberate maneuvers intended to unsettle and provoke you. The courtiers no longer act merely as observers, they are strategists, weaving invisible threads of influence aimed at exposing even the slightest misstep. Every motion you make is measured, every glance scrutinized. The young nobleman steps forward again, his posture relaxed but calculated. He does not speak loudly, yet the tilt of his head and the brief pause in his movement convey a silent message: we are watching. Any misstep will be noted. He exchanges a glance with the noblewoman, who gives a faint, almost imperceptible nod. You feel the invisible coordination tighten, the first overt signs of a trap beginning to form. A page glides through the hall, carrying a ceremonial scroll. The courtiers adjust subtly, acknowledging the item and the precise choreography of its delivery. You notice how even minor shifts, a bow, a hand gesture, the angle of a head, are laden with meaning. These rituals are no longer neutral, they are part of a calculated test, and your reaction is now the focus. You remind yourself to observe every detail, yet not to react too quickly, for overreaction could be as dangerous as ignorance. From the far side of the room, the senior courtier who had first tested you whispers to a companion, words low enough for only a few to hear: must see if he understands, any slip will be revealing. The intent is unmistakable. You are under targeted scrutiny, and the stakes of this observation are already terrifyingly high. You try to control your breathing, steady your pulse, and maintain an appearance of calm, but inside, your mind races. Each gesture of the courtiers, each flick of an eye, each whisper, is part of a web. The palace itself seems alive, a silent predator, each stone, each polished floorboard part of the mechanism designed to trap the unwary. The noblewoman approaches slightly, her movements smooth and deliberate. She stops just within your line of sight, tilts her head, and allows her eyes to meet yours for a brief but calculated moment. Her glance carries multiple messages: assessment, subtle challenge, an unspoken question. You force your expression into neutrality, though the tension in your muscles screams otherwise. She whispers something to a companion, eyes still on you. This is no idle curiosity, it is the first tangible snare being laid. A low murmur spreads across the hall as courtiers begin coordinating their positions, shifting in a choreography almost imperceptible but precise. You sense the trap, a combination of social pressure, observation, and manipulation. You realize that even if you do nothing, the very act of being present exposes you to risk. Every second is a test. Every subtle glance or miscalculated gesture could tip the scales. The aide leans closer, whispering, "Watch for coordination." They test, probe, unsettle. Do not react impulsively. Survival depends on calm, observation, and precision. His words echo in your mind, a lifeline in a storm of invisible threats. You nod, forcing your nerves into submission, aware that every moment is a challenge of will, focus, and composure. From the far end of the hall, the young nobleman initiates a subtle action, a small shift in posture, a quiet adjustment of a hand, a barely noticeable change in gaze. It is a signal, a spark that sets the coordinated test fully in motion. The noblewoman responds in kind, other courtiers follow, and you feel the weight of the trap settling like a cage around you. Time seems to stretch, each second laden with silent judgment. You are aware of being the center of a subtle, deadly game, and the realization chills you to the bone: the palace is not merely a place of ritual and ceremony. It is a labyrinth of hidden dangers, where every action is a test, every observation a potential threat, and survival depends on mastering an invisible language that outsiders are never meant to learn. As the coordinated trap tightens, you understand one stark truth: the first real danger has been laid. It is subtle, silent, and nearly impossible to detect unless you are constantly alert. And in Emperor Meiji's court, subtlety is lethal. The trap that had been forming all morning now begins to exert its influence. You feel it like a tightening cord around your chest, subtle but insistent, pulling your attention to every motion, every whisper, every glance in the hall. The young nobleman and noblewoman coordinate effortlessly, each subtle gesture amplifying the tension, each shift of posture a calculated test. You realize with dawning horror that the first snare is no longer theoretical, it is active, aimed squarely at you. A courtier approaches with a ceremonial tray, bowing just slightly before presenting it. The movements are flawless, almost hypnotic, yet you sense the underlying intent: the tray, the slight angle of the bow, the timing of the gesture, all of it is a part of the trap. You are expected to respond, to react, to interpret, and any error will be noted, recorded, and judged. One wrong step could turn curiosity into lethal scrutiny. The noblewoman leans subtly toward a companion, whispering words that you can only partially catch. Watch how he reacts, must see his understanding. You feel the weight of their scrutiny press down on you, the realization that the first test is no longer about etiquette, it is about survival. You must navigate invisible currents of power and influence with the precision of someone who has lived their entire life in this deadly dance. Your eyes flick from one courtier to another, memorizing their positions, gestures, and subtle micro-expressions. Every detail matters, the angle of a head, the placement of a hand, the rhythm of breathing. You are learning the invisible language of the court in real time, yet the cost of error is higher than you could have imagined. Each misinterpreted gesture, each delayed reaction, each flicker of unease could mark you as incompetent, or worse. The young nobleman approaches more directly, his expression neutral but his intent clear. He speaks softly, words polite but laden with significance. It is important to understand our ways. Even a visitor must adapt quickly. His gaze is piercing, measuring, and you realize he is watching not just your actions but your thought process. Every hesitation, every second of doubt is observed. A page glides past, carrying another ceremonial item. Courtiers adjust their positions subtly, acknowledging the delivery, but you notice that they also shift in a way that frames you in the center of observation. You are now the focus, the pivot of the subtle power play, and the first snare tightens incrementally. The aide leans in, whispering with urgency, "Do not misstep." They are testing your awareness, patience, and understanding. Respond only when necessary. One miscalculation could be catastrophic. You nod silently, heart hammering, as the gravity of his words sinks in. You are not merely navigating etiquette, you are navigating potential death, veiled behind smiles, whispers, and the choreography of power. Suddenly, the noblewoman signals subtly to the young nobleman, a shift in posture almost invisible, yet you feel the weight of its implication. The trap is now fully engaged. The assembly watches, coordinated in their subtle orchestration, and you understand that even silence is now a form of action, judged and measured. You are a participant in a test designed not just to evaluate, but to unsettle, provoke, and potentially ruin. Every micro-expression, every calculated bow, every controlled gesture becomes a battlefield. You realize that this is only the beginning, the first snare has been laid, but it is far from the last. Survival requires constant vigilance, rapid comprehension, and the ability to anticipate moves before they are made. Even a slight misjudgment could ignite a chain of reactions that might end your life, or at least your place in the court. As the afternoon drags on, the palace seems to close around you. The courtiers' whispers, glances, and subtle shifts create a nearly imperceptible storm of tension. You are trapped in the first of many snares, and one thought dominates your mind: in Emperor Meiji's court, survival is earned through mastery of the invisible rules, precision of movement, and absolute control of self. And now, the true test has begun. The first snare tightens, and you feel its pressure with a tangible weight. What had been subtle tests and silent observations now start to have consequences. You notice the courtiers shifting their positions in response to your actions, the young nobleman and noblewoman subtly coordinating their influence to provoke reactions, to measure your composure, and to see if the slightest hesitation might betray weakness. A senior courtier approaches, bowing lightly but with an intensity that makes your skin prickle. He speaks softly, in tones that are polite yet edged with implicit warning. One must understand the rhythms of our court to survive, even a visitor must adapt swiftly. The words feel innocuous, but you know better, they carry threat, expectation, and judgment. You are now subject to consequences simply for existing in this carefully balanced environment. A page glides past with a ceremonial object. As he moves, you notice a subtle shift. The courtiers nearest him slightly adjust their stance, directing your attention toward the center of the hall. You understand with dread that your behavior is being measured against every action around you, every minute gesture catalogued and interpreted. A misstep here could be used as evidence of incompetence, disrespect, or naivety. The noblewoman leans toward her companion, whispering, her gaze never leaving you. Observe him closely. Any sign of weakness, you realize that the first consequences are not yet overt punishment, but subtle pressure applied to gauge your response. The palace is orchestrating a psychological test as lethal as any blade. You force yourself to remain still, every nerve alert, every breath controlled. The young nobleman takes another calculated step, his gaze locking with yours for a fraction longer than etiquette allows. You feel the invisible trap closing incrementally. One poorly judged movement, one hesitation, one micro-expression, could set off a chain of interpretations that might result in social exile, or worse. The aide whispers urgently, the consequences begin silently. Each test builds upon the previous one. Respond carefully, observe constantly. This is how they measure survival. You nod, heart pounding, recognizing the truth of his words. The palace has already begun exacting consequences for minor errors, and you are acutely aware that survival depends on both perception and restraint. Across the hall, a whisper reaches you from a distance. The words are carefully chosen, not loud enough to be public but audible to those listening. One misstep could cost him everything. You realize with a jolt that the first tangible effects of the trap are already taking shape. Courtiers are adjusting, positioning, and aligning their influence to see if you can endure, if you can navigate the invisible currents, if you can survive this intricate web of silent power. You notice a subtle smirk from a nearby courtier, a sign that the first outcome has been noted, a minor error recorded and quietly remarked upon. It is a reminder that nothing here is without consequence, that every action is a reflection of your judgment, and that the courtier's observations are relentless. Even the smallest perceived mistake can ripple outward, becoming a part of the narrative that defines you in this deadly environment. The palace feels alive with judgment. Every polished surface, every rustle of silk, every quiet breath contributes to the assessment. You are now fully aware that the first snare is not just a test of etiquette, it is a demonstration of power, a subtle exertion of influence designed to gauge, provoke, and intimidate. The first consequences are psychological, yet their impact is profound. You take a controlled breath, forcing calm over rising panic. Survival here requires more than awareness, it requires anticipation, composure, and a mastery of subtlety. The first snare has been triggered, the first consequences applied, and the palace has made one undeniable truth clear: in Emperor Meiji's court, even minor missteps are never without cost. The subtle pressure of the first snare has now evolved into a more tangible threat. Courtiers no longer merely observe, they act. The young nobleman shifts deliberately, taking positions that force your gaze, that test your composure. The noblewoman mirrors his movements, a silent signal to others: the trap has been activated fully, and now the consequences are about to escalate. A senior courtier approaches you, bowing with precise grace. His words are calm, polite, almost ceremonious, but carry a hidden edge. Even a visitor must learn quickly, understanding is essential for survival. You feel the weight of his gaze, the hidden message clear: failure to comply, hesitation, or ignorance could invite public scrutiny or worse. Each syllable is a test, and you know that any misinterpretation may be noted and used against you. The ceremonial tray passes once more, but this time, the courtier's coordinated movements amplify the intensity of observation. Every tilt of a head, every micro-adjustment of the sleeves, every subtle nod is a deliberate assessment of your response. You feel your pulse quicken, the invisible web closing around you, each second charged with unseen judgment. The aide leans closer, whispering with urgency: they are escalating. Observe, anticipate, and respond with extreme caution. One misstep now will carry consequences you cannot undo. You nod, aware that his warning is not exaggeration. The trap has moved from testing awareness to actively creating pressure, and the palace is orchestrating it flawlessly. A page stumbles slightly while carrying a ceremonial object. The movement is minor, almost imperceptible, yet you notice the reactions ripple across the court. Courtiers shift their postures, their eyes flick toward you briefly, calculating, interpreting. You realize the subtle snare has begun to influence the environment itself, everything now conspires to see your response under duress. The noblewoman steps closer, her silk robes brushing softly against the polished floor. Her gaze meets yours with a mixture of assessment and challenge. She whispers something to a companion, their heads inclined toward each other, eyes still fixed on you. You understand that they are coordinating, your actions are being manipulated, and the palace itself has become a stage for the trap to unfold. The young nobleman gives a slight nod to another courtier, and you notice the faintest smirk pass among them. It is subtle, almost dismissible, yet it carries meaning. The first response has been noted, and now they are prepared to push further. You feel the invisible hand of influence guiding the tests, escalating the pressure deliberately to gauge your limits. Your muscles tighten. Survival requires more than calm observation, it demands anticipation, precise judgment, and control over both physical and mental reactions. Every glance, every shift, every breath you take is a piece of a puzzle that must be solved without error. One misstep, and the entire assembly could perceive weakness, incompetence, or disrespect. A faint whisper passes through the hall, deliberate and pointed. He must prove his worth, see if he can endure. You realize that the subtle trap is now layered with expectation. You are no longer merely reacting, you are being maneuvered into positions that will test your skill, your perception, and your composure in increasingly perilous ways. The palace itself seems to tighten around you. The polished floors, the careful arrangement of courtiers, the orchestrated whispers, and the measured gestures, all combine to form an environment designed to ensnare and test. You are acutely aware that each misstep, no matter how minor, could escalate into serious consequences, and that the courtiers will notice, interpret, and exploit it without mercy. The day drags on, each second a lesson in vigilance. You understand that the first snare is only the beginning, the escalation of danger has begun, and the palace is a battlefield where survival depends on reading invisible currents, anticipating moves, and responding with flawless precision. One false step, and the carefully balanced environment could shift against you in an instant. You breathe slowly, forcing your mind to focus. Observation, patience, and control are now your only weapons. The trap has been set, the first consequences have been applied, and the danger is escalating. You are learning the harsh truth: in Emperor Meiji's court, survival is earned with vigilance, cunning, and absolute mastery of subtlety. And now, the tests are only becoming more perilous. The tension in the hall has reached a new level. The first snare has evolved from observation into subtle, targeted attacks designed to unsettle you. Courtiers no longer merely watch, they provoke. Every glance, every whisper, every movement now carries the weight of intention. You feel as if invisible hands are pressing against you from every side, testing your reactions, measuring your resolve. The young nobleman steps forward, approaching the center of the hall with deliberate grace. His eyes linger on you for a heartbeat longer than etiquette allows, and you feel a cold calculation behind his gaze. He is not testing courtesy or knowledge now, he is testing your nerve, your ability to remain composed under direct, silent pressure. The noblewoman mirrors his movements, a subtle signal to others that the test is escalating. A page passes carrying a ceremonial scroll, moving with flawless precision. The courtiers acknowledge the display with subtle nods, but you sense something more: they are using the ritual as a tool to observe your reaction. Every tilt of your head, every adjustment of your posture, every micro-expression is noted. The palace itself seems complicit, a living instrument of judgment, and you are the target. The aide whispers urgently, they are escalating. Observe, anticipate, respond carefully. Every reaction is now part of the test. You nod silently, forcing your nerves into submission, aware that his advice is the only anchor in the swirling tension. The trap is no longer theoretical, it is active, and it moves with precision. The noblewoman approaches slightly closer, her gaze fixed on you. She whispers to a companion, and their heads incline toward each other in a silent exchange. You feel the first real pressure of coordinated provocation. It is subtle, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. They are testing your composure, your observation skills, and your ability to anticipate their intentions. A faint ripple passes through the assembly. Courtiers adjust positions, their subtle shifts forming a near imperceptible net of influence around you. The young nobleman signals with a tilt of his head, the noblewoman responds, and other courtiers follow suit. You realize with chilling clarity that you are being maneuvered, guided into reactions that will reveal your understanding, or your mistakes. Your pulse quickens. Survival requires more than calm observation, it demands anticipation, precise judgment, and control over both body and mind. Every blink, every breath, every small gesture is a potential liability. One misstep, and the courtier's silent attacks could escalate, potentially shaping your reputation, or your very survival, in this palace. The senior courtier steps closer, speaking softly but pointedly. One must understand the subtleties of our court. Even hesitation is a signal. His words are polite, almost ceremonious, yet you recognize the threat. You are being drawn into a game where silence, hesitation, or misinterpretation could have consequences as real as any blade. Across the hall, you notice the noblewoman's eyes flick briefly toward the young nobleman. A subtle smile passes between them, faint but unmistakable. You realize that the first attacks are coordinated, every action, every gesture, every shift is part of a deliberate effort to probe your limits. You are no longer merely a guest, you are the centerpiece of a psychological battlefield. Time stretches as the palace exerts its subtle, invisible pressure. The coordinated attacks continue, whispers, glances, gestures, positioning, all designed to test, unsettle, and provoke. You understand now that this is only the beginning. Survival in Emperor Meiji's court is not about strength or courage alone, it is about perception, anticipation, and mastery of the invisible rules. The first subtle attacks have begun. You can feel them, even if they are nearly imperceptible. And with each passing moment, you realize the horrifying truth: in this court, survival is earned, and the stakes are life itself. The subtle attacks have escalated into something more tangible. Courtiers no longer merely test your observation skills, they now provoke directly. A deliberate comment, a carefully timed gesture, the slightest breach of etiquette, every action is calculated to push you toward reaction, and every reaction will be scrutinized. The young nobleman steps closer to the center, his posture relaxed yet deliberate. His eyes meet yours and hold, too long to be casual, too precise to be accidental. It is a silent provocation, a challenge to your composure, your understanding of the court, and your ability to navigate the invisible hierarchy. You feel the invisible net of influence tightening, and the palace itself seems to pulse with anticipation. A page glides past, carrying another ceremonial object. The placement is flawless, but the timing is deliberate, intended to test whether you notice, whether you react, and how you interpret the signal. You realize with growing unease that the palace has become an instrument of subtle psychological warfare, every object, every gesture, every whisper a potential threat. The noblewoman approaches, her movement measured and elegant, yet there is something predatory in her gaze. She pauses, her eyes locking with yours for a heartbeat longer than protocol permits. Then she whispers to a companion, a comment too quiet to hear, but accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. You understand instantly, the first coordinated provocation is underway, and you are its target. Across the hall, the courtiers shift positions, their movements deliberate and calculated. It is no longer a subtle game of observation, the palace itself has become a stage, the courtiers performers, and you the unwitting centerpiece of their test. Every action, every glance, every micro-expression is now part of a carefully orchestrated challenge. The aide leans in, voice low, they are provoking you now. Observe carefully, respond deliberately. Every reaction is a test. His words are urgent but calm, a lifeline amid the storm of invisible pressures. You nod, forcing yourself to focus, aware that one false move could escalate the consequences in ways you cannot yet predict. A senior courtier moves closer, speaking softly, his tone courteous but edged with implication. even the smallest hesitation can speak volumes. One must remain vigilant. You realize that this is not idle advice. It is a warning, a direct provocation, a reminder that the court's judgment is immediate, unforgiving, and lethal in its subtlety. The young nobleman and noblewoman exchange a glance, coordinating silently. A ripple passes through the assembly, a near imperceptible shift in posture and attention. You sense that the trap is closing further, that every move you make is being guided, influenced, and recorded. Even inaction is a choice, and even hesitation carries consequences. Your mind races as you calculate possible responses. Bow, speak, remain silent. Each carries risk. You understand that survival here demands perfect timing, flawless judgment, and an awareness that borders on instinct. Even the slightest micro-expression, unnoticed by an untrained eye, could be interpreted as arrogance, fear, or ignorance. Time stretches, every second heavy with potential threat. The palace hums with quiet menace, a living entity designed to test, provoke, and manipulate. You feel the first tangible consequences of the snare beginning to manifest, subtle judgments, veiled challenges, and pressures that force your mind and body to react with precision. And as you stand in the center of this silent storm, the terrifying reality becomes undeniable. In Emperor Meiji's court, the games of observation and provocation are not mere tests, they are trials of survival. One wrong reaction, one misjudged gesture, one delayed blink, and the consequences could ripple outward, shaping your fate in ways you are only beginning to comprehend. The direct provocations have now begun to crystallize into something more dangerous: schemes. You realize, with a chilling clarity, that the subtle tests and provocations were only the prelude. Courtiers are no longer merely testing your nerves, they are actively plotting, weaving intricate webs of influence and manipulation aimed at undermining you. The young nobleman steps back slightly, allowing the noblewoman to take the lead. Her movements are deliberate, graceful, yet predatory. She leans toward a companion and whispers, eyes never leaving you. We must see if he falters, the first mistake will define him. The words are barely audible, but their intent is unmistakable. The trap is no longer hidden, it is being actively constructed. Across the hall, courtiers shift their positions subtly, coordinating their observations. Every glance, every whispered word, every minor gesture is now part of a larger design. You understand that you are being maneuvered into a carefully constructed scenario. One misstep, one hesitation, one misjudged reaction could set off a cascade of consequences that will be impossible to undo. A page glides past, carrying a ceremonial object, perfectly aligned with the choreography of the court. You notice, however, that the timing of the movement is designed to catch your attention, to provoke a reaction. Your heart pounds as you force yourself to remain composed, every muscle tense, aware that the palace itself has become a stage for manipulation. The aide whispers urgently, they are building a scheme around you. Observe, anticipate, and act only when necessary. One miscalculation, one visible doubt, and the outcome could be disastrous. You nod, forcing calm over the rising panic, knowing that each subtle movement, each minor gesture could tip the delicate balance in their favor. The noblewoman signals subtly to the young nobleman. He responds with a faint nod, and you notice the ripple through the assembly. Courtiers adjust positions, tilt their heads, and exchange discreet glances. You are the focal point of their coordination, the center of a web of observation and influence. Even the slightest twitch, the faintest hesitation, could be recorded, interpreted, and used against you. A senior courtier approaches, voice calm but edged with implied warning. Understanding our ways is not enough, one must anticipate, and act with precision. His words are courteous yet carry threat. You recognize that the first schemes are no longer merely tests, they are setups, designed to see if you can survive under the subtle pressure of manipulation. The air in the hall feels charged, almost electric. Every whisper, every adjustment, every micro-expression contributes to the network of subtle schemes being woven around you. You feel the first tangible effects, minor judgments noted, subtle challenges amplified, and invisible pressure applied. The palace itself seems alive, responding to the courtier's will, guiding your actions into predetermined paths. Your mind races, calculating each possible response. Speak, bow, remain silent. Each choice is fraught with danger. You realize that survival here requires more than composure, it demands anticipation, understanding of the invisible hierarchy, and mastery of subtle influence. One false move could escalate the schemes, drawing the courtiers' full attention and exposing you to their combined power. As the afternoon progresses, the first schemes solidify. The courtiers coordinate their actions with near imperceptible precision. You are caught in the center of a silent storm of manipulation, your every move observed, interpreted, and weighed. The palace itself is no longer merely a setting, it is a participant, amplifying the consequences of your actions, shaping the unfolding intrigue. And in that moment, you understand the terrifying reality: in Emperor Meiji's court, the first mistakes are rarely fatal, but the first schemes can be. One misjudged gesture, one poorly chosen word, one moment of hesitation, and the delicate web of power and influence could snap, leaving you exposed, vulnerable, and at the mercy of forces far beyond your control. The first schemes are no longer subtle, they begin to unfold, revealing the danger you are truly in. The young nobleman and noblewoman coordinate with precision, each movement and glance carefully orchestrated to manipulate your reactions. You sense that the invisible web of influence around you is tightening, and the palace itself seems to pulse with calculated intent. A senior courtier approaches, bowing lightly, his tone polite but laced with sharp undertones. One must always anticipate the currents of the court, even the smallest misstep carries weight. His eyes scan you like a predator evaluating prey, and you realize that every minor hesitation you feel is being amplified and assessed. The first real consequences of the schemes are now beginning to manifest. The noblewoman whispers something to a companion, her eyes flicking toward you with a challenge. You catch only fragments: he must falter, reveal himself. The words hang in the air like a trapdoor waiting to open. You understand that the courtiers are not merely observing, they are setting conditions designed to provoke errors, to see if you can withstand pressure without faltering. A page moves past, carrying a ceremonial object with flawless timing. But now, the arrangement of courtiers subtly frames you in the center of attention, forcing your awareness and testing your reactions. You are aware that the palace itself has become an active participant in the schemes: polished floors, the positioning of every figure, even the echoes of distant whispers, all conspiring to test, unsettle, and provoke you. The aide leans closer, voice low: the schemes are unfolding. Remain vigilant. Respond only when necessary. Each reaction will be judged. You nod, your pulse quickening. You are no longer merely a guest in the court, you are a piece in a living, shifting puzzle designed to test every instinct, every judgment, every ounce of composure you possess. The young nobleman moves with subtle grace, tilting his head, adjusting his stance, and sending a clear but nearly invisible signal to the noblewoman. She responds in kind, their coordination seamless, almost imperceptible. You realize that every micro-expression, every subtle motion, is part of a strategy to observe, unsettle, and gauge your ability to maintain composure under sustained pressure. A ripple passes through the hall as other courtiers adjust their positions, tilting heads and exchanging silent glances. The first consequences of the schemes have now become tangible: whispers of judgment, subtle tests of patience, and provocations designed to elicit reactions. You feel the psychological weight pressing in from all sides, a net of influence that you must navigate flawlessly. Your mind races, calculating options. Speak, remain silent, move slightly, bow. Each choice carries risk. You realize with growing fear that the schemes are designed not merely to test etiquette, but to provoke mistakes, reveal weakness, and manipulate perception. One poorly judged response could be catalogued and amplified, becoming the foundation of further intrigue against you. Across the hall, the noblewoman's eyes flick briefly toward the young nobleman. A subtle smirk passes between them. You understand instantly, the first layer of the schemes has succeeded in engaging you. You are reacting, adapting, surviving, but the courtiers are already ready to escalate, to push further, and to observe every consequence. Time stretches, each moment charged with invisible tension. You are at the center of a complex, living game of power, manipulation, and observation. The first schemes have revealed the palace's true nature, a place where subtle movements, whispered words, and calculated gestures hold the weight of life itself. Survival here requires mastery of not only etiquette, but perception, anticipation, and unerring self-control. And as the afternoon light filters through the tall windows, you realize with stark clarity that the first real challenges have begun to shape your fate. The schemes are active, the courtiers are coordinated, and the palace itself is a web of subtle threats. One misstep, and the delicate balance may shatter, leaving you exposed in a court where the smallest error can carry consequences as severe as any blade. The schemes are no longer subtle, the palace has become a living instrument of tension, and you are at its center. Courtiers coordinate in near imperceptible patterns, their glances, whispers, and gestures designed to provoke reaction, to test endurance, and to measure your composure. Every move you make is observed, every breath assessed. The invisible trap tightens with each passing second. The young nobleman approaches with deliberate grace, his eyes locking onto yours for a heartbeat longer than etiquette allows. He does not speak, yet the silent pressure in his gaze is suffocating. You feel as if your very thoughts are being evaluated, measured against the standards of a world you barely understand. One hesitation, one flicker of uncertainty, could be used to manipulate further, to draw you into another layer of the court's intricate web. The noblewoman mirrors his movements, subtly adjusting her position, whispering to a companion, her eyes never leaving you. Observe, test his understanding, you catch fragments, but the intent is unmistakable. This is no longer a passive observation. The first deliberate manipulations have begun, and the palace is orchestrating them with precision. A ceremonial tray passes through the hall, carried flawlessly by a page. Courtiers adjust their positions subtly, tilting heads and exchanging silent signals. You realize with growing unease that you are being positioned, framed, and observed. Even a minor miscalculation could be recorded and interpreted as weakness, incompetence, or disrespect. Survival requires constant calculation, anticipation, and composure. The aide leans close, voice low, they are escalating. Do not react impulsively. One misstep now could cascade into consequences you cannot control. You nod, heart hammering. The advice is your anchor, but the weight of the palace, the precision of its orchestrated schemes, and the subtle threats embedded in every movement, fill you with a cold awareness of how precarious your situation has become. Across the hall, whispers ripple through the courtiers. Watch him closely, must see his reaction, you feel their scrutiny as a tangible force pressing against you, testing every instinct. The first manipulations have evolved into layered provocations, pushing you toward errors while observing your every response. You understand that you are being maneuvered into actions designed to reveal your weaknesses, and the pressure is escalating steadily. The young nobleman and noblewoman exchange a glance, almost imperceptible, and the other courtiers adjust in response. The invisible net tightens, and you sense that every subtle movement of your body is now being evaluated, weighed, and recorded. Even the act of standing still is interpreted. Every breath, every blink, every micro-expression matters. Your mind races, calculating responses, predicting the courtier's next moves, and seeking the balance between observation and action. Bow, remain silent, speak cautiously. Each choice carries the risk of misinterpretation. You feel the palace itself shaping your behavior, guiding your responses, and amplifying the consequences of even the smallest gesture. A faint ripple of tension passes through the hall as the courtiers coordinate another subtle maneuver. You realize with stark clarity that the pressure is deliberate, methodical, and unrelenting. The first schemes have fully matured into active, ongoing manipulation, and the palace is now a battlefield of perception, influence, and silent power. And as you stand amidst this orchestrated storm, you feel the terrifying truth: in Emperor Meiji's court, survival is not merely about etiquette or intelligence, it is about endurance, anticipation, and the mastery of invisible rules. The pressure is tightening, the consequences are escalating, and one misstep, one poorly judged gesture, could tip the delicate balance and unleash the first real, unavoidable danger. The tension that had been building subtly now manifests as real, almost palpable pressure. The first schemes and provocations have evolved into direct psychological manipulation. Every courtesan in the room participates unconsciously in a silent, coordinated effort to gauge your limits. You are no longer merely observed, you are tested under the strain of deliberate, orchestrated influence. The young nobleman steps forward, his movements smooth and deliberate. His gaze locks onto you, unwavering, and you feel the silent command, measure yourself, hold your composure, or falter. It is no longer a polite test of etiquette, it is a direct challenge to your presence, your instincts, your ability to survive in this intricate, unforgiving environment. The noblewoman mirrors him, her silk robes whispering softly as she moves with measured grace. She leans close to a companion, whispering words that float just beyond your hearing, yet the intent is clear, the palace itself conspires to unsettle you, to provoke you into reaction, to see if you can endure under unrelenting scrutiny. A ceremonial tray passes through the hall, carried with flawless precision. Yet now, its movement is clearly timed to test your awareness. Courtiers subtly reposition themselves around it, creating a living frame of observation, designed to expose even the smallest lapse in judgment. You realize that the palace is not merely a setting, it is a participant in this intricate psychological test. The aide leans close, voice urgent, they are pushing the boundaries now. One mistake, one subtle sign of weakness, and it will be noted. Survive the observation first, then act. His words remind you that composure is your primary weapon, vigilance your shield. Even a fleeting miscalculation could trigger consequences far beyond the visible. Across the hall, courtiers exchange quick, almost imperceptible signals. The noblewoman's eyes meet the young nobleman's for a heartbeat, a silent affirmation of coordination. You notice the ripple effect as other courtiers subtly adjust, tilting heads, shifting weight, whispering just enough to maintain the appearance of routine. You are the focal point of a living, breathing mechanism of scrutiny. Your pulse races. Every micro-expression, every subtle gesture, every fraction of hesitation is a potential liability. Survival demands perfection in the smallest details, the tilt of your head, the pacing of your breaths, the tension in your hands. You feel the cumulative weight of the palace's orchestrated attention pressing down on you, a living, breathing test of your composure. A senior courtier approaches, his bow measured, his voice calm yet edged with implication. In this hall, understanding alone is not enough, composure under observation is the true measure. You sense that his words are both a warning and a challenge. The first real tests of endurance are here, and the palace will reward only those who navigate them flawlessly. Subtle provocations continue, rippling through the courtiers with careful coordination. Each whisper, each tilt of the head, each subtle shift of position is designed to provoke, unsettle, and observe your response. You realize that the palace is now a pressure chamber, and your ability to survive depends on anticipating these coordinated moves before they happen. Time seems to stretch unnaturally, each second weighted with tension. The first consequences of missteps are now a constant threat, palpable even in the absence of overt action. You are acutely aware that one poorly judged glance, one moment of hesitation, one subtle sign of discomfort could set off a chain reaction, and the palace itself would amplify your mistake. Standing at the center of this orchestrated storm, you understand the chilling truth: in Emperor Meiji's court, endurance is as vital as intelligence, anticipation as essential as etiquette. The pressure is no longer hypothetical, it is real, deliberate, and unrelenting. And the first visible consequences of failure are poised to manifest at any moment. The invisible pressure that had been building now begins to manifest in tangible consequences. Courtiers no longer merely observe or provoke, their subtle manipulations are producing results. You feel the first ripple of danger, an almost imperceptible shift in the court's dynamic that signals the real stakes are now unavoidable. The young nobleman approaches with deliberate calm, his gaze piercing, as if weighing the very essence of your being. He pauses for a heartbeat too long, and you feel the first subtle judgment. It is not a public condemnation, yet, but you sense that one minor misstep now could trigger whispers, rumors, or the subtle erosion of your standing among the court's influential figures. The noblewoman glides past, her silk robes brushing the polished floor. Her eyes meet yours briefly, and the corner of her mouth curls into the faintest smirk. She leans toward a companion, whispering something just beyond your hearing. He shows, but will it last? The meaning is clear, the first tests of endurance have yielded results, and those results are being recorded, evaluated, and interpreted. A ceremonial object passes nearby, carried with perfect grace. Courtiers subtly reposition themselves, creating a living frame around you. Every glance you cast, every micro-movement of your hands or head is now a part of a growing narrative, one that will determine how you are perceived in the subtle hierarchy of the palace. You are at the center of a slowly unfolding consequence, one whose impact may reach far beyond the hall itself. The aide leans in, whispering urgently, they are noting your every response. Even small hesitation, even minor doubt, can be leveraged against you. Survival depends on composure, anticipation, and subtlety. His words hammer into your consciousness like a lifeline. You force your nerves into control, every muscle tensed, aware that the first tangible consequences are now cascading through the court. Across the hall, whispers pass almost imperceptibly, a ripple of coordinated judgment among the courtiers. The young nobleman signals subtly to the noblewoman, and other courtiers shift minutely in response. You realize with a jolt, the first subtle manipulations have matured into consequences. The court is not merely observing, it is shaping your fate in real time, testing your endurance and documenting your reactions. Your mind races as you calculate every potential response. Bow, remain silent, speak cautiously, shift slightly. Each action carries weight, and the palace amplifies even minor errors. You sense the invisible pressure guiding you, forcing your reactions into a controlled space where one misjudged movement could have repercussions. The first consequences are psychological, yet their effect is as real and dangerous as any blade. The noblewoman leans slightly forward, whispering to her companion, her eyes flicking toward you with a subtle challenge. You feel the weight of that gaze, a silent measurement of your control, your perception, your ability to endure. It is a reminder, the first consequences are not public, not visible, yet they are no less potent. Time stretches, every second thick with tension. You are acutely aware that the palace itself now participates in the consequences, amplifying subtle errors, cataloging hesitation, and testing your composure. The first real threat is not death, but perception. The delicate social currents of Emperor Meiji's court can destroy a man's position, influence, or future as surely as any overt punishment. Standing in the center of the hall, you understand a terrifying reality: the first consequences have begun, subtle yet real, and the court's mechanisms of observation, provocation, and manipulation are fully active. Survival now depends on more than observation, it depends on precision, anticipation, and the mastery of the invisible forces that shape the palace. The first subtle consequences have fully ripened, and now their impact begins to press against you with tangible weight. You are no longer merely observed or tested, your standing, your reputation, and your very survival are now in play. The palace has transformed into a living web of scrutiny, where each reaction you make carries immediate significance. The young nobleman steps closer, his movement deliberate, controlled. His eyes lock onto yours, holding, measuring, dissecting. You feel the pressure of judgment as if it were a physical force. A minor hesitation, a misjudged glance, a slight misstep in posture could now ripple outward, influencing not only your own standing but the perception of you by all those in the hall. The noblewoman glides past with her usual grace, but her presence carries a sharper edge now. Her eyes flick toward you with a hint of challenge, and you sense a subtle shift in the court's dynamics. Her whispered words to a companion are meant to be heard only by those attuned to the court's invisible cues. See how he responds, weakness will show. You realize that the first visible consequences are not yet public, but they are being noted, recorded, and judged by those who control the flow of power. A ceremonial object passes by, carried with flawless poise by a page. Courtiers subtly adjust their positions, creating a living frame of influence that surrounds you. Every subtle gesture you make, the angle of your head, the placement of your hands, the rhythm of your breathing, is now observed in detail. You feel the palace itself pressing against you, shaping your behavior and guiding your reactions like a river channeling water. The aide leans close, whispering urgently, the consequences are now active. Any sign of hesitation, doubt, or misjudgment will be noticed. Endurance, precision, and anticipation are your only defenses. His words are a lifeline amid the growing storm. You force calm over panic, reminding yourself that survival depends not only on observation but on flawless execution of every movement and thought. Across the hall, whispers ripple through the courtiers, coordinated and precise. The young nobleman signals the noblewoman with a subtle tilt of his head, and other courtiers respond with minute adjustments. You are at the center of a silent but active web, one that interprets every micro-expression and assigns meaning to every gesture. The consequences of missteps are no longer theoretical, they are now unfolding around you. Your mind races, weighing every possible reaction. Speak, remain silent, bow, move slightly. Every choice carries weight, and the palace magnifies even the smallest error. You feel the invisible hand of the court guiding, nudging, and shaping your responses, each adjustment carrying potential repercussions. The first consequences have moved from observation to influence, and their reach is subtle but dangerous. The noblewoman leans toward a companion, whispering again, her eyes flicking toward you with a quiet intensity. You understand, this is no longer merely a test of endurance or etiquette. The first consequences have begun to actively manipulate perception, turning minor errors into indicators of weakness. The palace itself has become an instrument of subtle control, and you are caught squarely in its center. Time stretches, every moment heavy with tension. The first consequences are now undeniably real, pressing on your mind and body, testing every instinct and reflex. You are painfully aware that in Emperor Meiji's court, even the smallest lapse can set off a chain reaction, and the palace's silent mechanisms of judgment and influence are now fully engaged. And standing amidst this orchestrated storm, you grasp the unyielding truth: survival in this court requires not only composure and intelligence but the mastery of anticipation, perception, and subtlety. The first consequences have arrived, and they will shape every next step you take. The first subtle consequences have now begun to show their teeth. The palace, once an elegant stage of ritual and decorum, has transformed into a living instrument of scrutiny and manipulation. Every gesture, every glance, every breath you take is measured, judged, and recorded. The invisible pressure that had been mounting now manifests as a palpable tension, pressing down on your nerves and testing your endurance. The young nobleman steps deliberately closer, his gaze fixed on you with unwavering intensity. You feel the weight of his observation like a tangible force. One misjudged movement, one subtle sign of uncertainty, could immediately trigger the court's mechanisms of judgment. You force your posture into perfect stillness, every muscle tense, every breath controlled, knowing that even a single lapse could have consequences. The noblewoman glides past, silk brushing the polished floor with deceptive softness. Her eyes flick toward you, sharp and calculating, and a faint smile plays at her lips. She whispers something to a companion, just audible enough for trained ears to catch: watch him closely, any falter will be noted. The meaning is unmistakable, the first visible consequences are now in motion, and the court is actively shaping how your presence is perceived. A ceremonial object passes near you, carried with flawless precision. Courtiers adjust their positions subtly, tilting heads, exchanging silent glances, and aligning themselves in ways that subtly influence your perception and actions. You realize that the palace itself has become part of the test. The arrangement of people, the movement of objects, even the echo of footsteps contributes to the ongoing evaluation. The aide leans in, whispering urgently, the consequences are now clear. Every gesture, every micro-expression, every blink will be noted. Remain vigilant. Respond with care. You nod, heart racing, fully aware that the first consequences have moved from psychological observation to active influence. The palace is no longer merely a backdrop, it is a participant in your trial. Across the hall, courtiers exchange subtle signals. The young nobleman tilts his head ever so slightly, the noblewoman responds in kind. Others follow suit, adjusting their posture and gaze. The first consequences have rippled outward, creating an environment where even a minor misstep could cascade into serious implications. The pressure of the palace is no longer invisible, it presses against you from every direction. Your mind races, calculating every possible reaction. Speak, remain silent, bow, shift slightly. Each choice carries risk. You understand that survival now depends on precision, anticipation, and a mastery of subtle influence. One poorly judged response, and the courtier's silent mechanisms could escalate the consequences, transforming a minor error into a lasting mark on your reputation, or worse. The noblewoman leans slightly forward, whispering again to her companion, her eyes locked on you with quiet intensity. You sense the calculated nature of the court's scrutiny. This is no longer a test of etiquette alone, it is a trial of endurance, perception, and psychological fortitude. The first consequences have begun to shape the narrative of your presence, and the palace itself guides the unfolding drama. Time stretches as tension builds, each second weighted with invisible threat. The first consequences are now fully active, pressing on your mind, influencing your behavior, and shaping the perception of every observer. You are painfully aware that in Emperor Meiji's court, survival is earned by mastery of subtlety, anticipation, and composure. And as you stand amidst the polished floors, whispering courtiers, and orchestrated movements, you feel the unyielding truth: the danger is real, the first consequences are manifest, and one misstep could set the stage for a cascade of peril from which there may be no return. The first consequences have now taken root, and their effects begin to ripple through the court. You feel the subtle yet insistent pressure of observation, testing, and judgment from every direction. The palace has become a living web, each thread pulled taut with the coordinated efforts of courtiers, and you are trapped at its center. Every micro-expression, every shift of posture, every controlled blink is now a potential signal, a piece of evidence in a game you barely understand. The young nobleman steps forward with deliberate precision, his gaze fixed on you like a scalpel. You feel the intensity of his scrutiny, weighing not only your outward gestures but the very intention behind them. One misjudged blink, one fractional pause, one faltering breath could now cascade into judgments that will be carried silently but permanently through the court. The noblewoman glides beside him, her movements smooth yet calculated. She leans toward a companion, whispering softly, "Watch him. Every detail counts." Any lapse, you catch only fragments, but the meaning is unmistakable, the web of consequence is tightening, and you are at risk of being ensnared further. The first subtle manipulations have matured into active influence, and the palace itself participates in the orchestration. A ceremonial tray passes, carried flawlessly by a page. Courtiers subtly reposition themselves around it, creating an invisible frame that channels your focus. You realize that the palace is now an instrument of control, every object, every gesture, every sound is leveraged to provoke, observe, and test your response. Even inaction is a choice that can be interpreted and used. The aide leans close, voice low and urgent, the web is tightening. Every gesture, every reaction is being noted. One misstep could tip the balance. You nod silently, heart pounding, understanding that survival now depends on anticipation, control, and the mastery of subtle perception. The first consequences are no longer hypothetical, they are active, influencing every second of your experience in the court. Across the hall, whispers ripple through the courtiers, almost imperceptibly coordinated. The young nobleman tilts his head, the noblewoman responds, and others adjust their postures subtly. You realize that every minor motion you make is now magnified, interpreted, and catalogued. The first consequences have evolved into an active network of influence, a web that ensnares any who falter. Your mind races, calculating every possible response. Should you speak, remain silent, bow slightly, shift your weight. Every choice carries risk, and the palace amplifies even the smallest misjudgment. The first consequences are now shaping the court's perception of you in ways that could determine your survival, influence, and standing. The noblewoman leans slightly forward, whispering again, her eyes locked on yours with quiet intensity. The subtle challenge is clear, the web is tightening, and you are the focal point. You sense that the palace itself orchestrates this network, manipulating perception, provoking reactions, and measuring endurance. Your every move, every reaction, and every hesitation is now part of the court's silent but lethal calculus. Time stretches, each second weighted with invisible force. The first consequences are no longer passive, they are active agents, pressing on your nerves, shaping your thoughts, and dictating the pace of survival. You understand, with stark clarity, that the palace is no longer just a setting. It is a participant, a silent predator, and you are at its center. And as you stand amidst the coordinated movements, whispered judgments, and the silent watch of every courtier, you grasp the terrifying truth: in Emperor Meiji's court, the web of influence is as lethal as any sword. Survival requires precision, composure, and mastery of the invisible currents that now flow relentlessly around you. The web of consequences has now solidified into active intrigue. The palace, once a stage of ceremonial elegance, has become a battlefield of silent maneuvering, and you are at its center. Every gesture, every glance, every controlled breath is scrutinized and interpreted. The pressure of observation is now unmistakable, pressing on you from every side, shaping your every move before you even make it. The young nobleman steps forward deliberately, his eyes fixed on you with clinical precision. You feel the weight of his scrutiny as if it were physical, pressing against your chest. Every fraction of hesitation, every subtle shift in posture, every micro-expression is now part of a growing narrative. One misjudged movement could now ripple outward, influencing perception, reputation, and possibly your survival. The noblewoman glides past, her movements smooth and calculating. Her eyes flick toward you, sharp and deliberate, and she whispers to a companion, "Watch him closely, any mistake could be revealing." The meaning is clear, the first subtle consequences have grown into coordinated intrigue. The palace itself now participates actively, influencing perception and guiding reactions. A ceremonial object passes, carried flawlessly by a page. Courtiers shift imperceptibly around it, creating a living frame that channels your attention and tests your reactions. You realize that the palace is now an active participant, orchestrating subtle provocations and observing every response. Even silence, stillness, or minor hesitation can be interpreted, catalogued, and used against you. The aide leans in, whispering urgently, the intrigue is escalating. Every gesture, every blink, every breath is being noted. Do not falter. Anticipate their moves, maintain composure, and respond with precision. You nod, heart racing, fully aware that the first consequences have evolved into coordinated strategies. Survival now depends on perception, anticipation, and mastery of subtle influence. Across the hall, the courtiers exchange silent signals. The young nobleman tilts his head, the noblewoman responds, and others subtly shift their positions. The web of intrigue tightens around you, each courtesan acting in coordination to observe, provoke, and test. You feel the palace itself channeling influence, shaping your behavior, and amplifying the consequences of every small misstep. Your mind races, calculating the safest possible responses. Speak, remain silent, bow, shift weight slightly. Each action carries risk. The palace magnifies even minor misjudgments, and the first consequences are no longer passive, they actively manipulate perception and shape the unfolding narrative of your presence. The noblewoman leans slightly forward, whispering again to a companion, her eyes locked on yours with subtle intensity. You sense that the web of intrigue now moves beyond observation, it is actively shaping events, provoking reactions, and testing endurance. Every micro-expression, every subtle movement is part of the court's silent calculus. Time stretches, weighted with invisible pressure. The first consequences have grown into active intrigue, pressing on your nerves, influencing your decisions, and dictating the pace of survival. The palace is no longer merely a setting, it is a participant, guiding perception, orchestrating provocation, and measuring resilience. And as you stand amidst the polished floors, coordinated whispers, and measured glances, you grasp the unyielding truth: in Emperor Meiji's court, intrigue is as deadly as any blade. Survival now depends on anticipation, composure, and the mastery of invisible currents that flow relentlessly around you, ready to punish the slightest misstep. The subtle intrigue has now shifted into overt danger. The first layers of consequence and manipulation have matured into active threats. You sense, with chilling clarity, that some courtiers no longer merely observe, they are ready to act against you. The palace is no longer simply a stage of etiquette, it is a battlefield of perception, influence, and power, and you stand in the crosshairs. The young nobleman steps closer, his gaze sharp and unwavering. There is an unmistakable intensity in his eyes, as if weighing not only your reactions but your very survival. You feel a silent warning in the way he holds his posture. One misstep now could trigger a chain of events designed to discredit, isolate, or destroy you. The noblewoman moves with deliberate grace, her eyes locked on yours, her whisper to a companion carrying an almost tangible edge: he must be tested, pushed to reveal himself. Her words are soft but carry power, and you realize that the first true threats are no longer hidden. They are embedded in the coordinated actions of the courtiers, designed to provoke errors and manipulate perception. A ceremonial object passes by, carried flawlessly by a page. Courtiers subtly shift around it, creating frames of influence that channel your attention and test your composure. Even inaction is no refuge, the palace itself seems to manipulate your reactions, turning every minor hesitation into evidence of vulnerability. The first threats are no longer theoretical, they are active, shaping events and evaluating your endurance. The aide leans in, voice low and urgent, they are ready to test you further. One misjudged gesture, one sign of doubt, and the consequences will escalate. Remain vigilant. Every move matters. You nod, heart pounding, realizing that the first threats now demand more than observation, they require strategy, anticipation, and flawless execution under pressure. Across the hall, subtle signals ripple through the courtiers. The young nobleman tilts his head, the noblewoman responds, and others adjust their positions with precision. You recognize the formation now, they are orchestrating pressure, isolating you subtly, guiding your actions into spaces where even a minor misstep can have amplified consequences. Your mind races, calculating each possible response. Speak cautiously, remain silent, bow slightly, adjust posture. Each action carries the risk of being interpreted as weakness, disrespect, or error. The palace amplifies even the smallest misjudgment, and you realize that these first threats are not idle, they are active tests, shaping perception and preparing the way for future, more dangerous moves. The noblewoman leans slightly forward, whispering again, her gaze locked on you, the intensity is unmistakable. You sense the first threats taking form not as words or overt actions but as coordinated influence, ready to exploit any lapse. Every glance, every gesture, every breath is now part of the palace's silent calculus. Time stretches, thick with invisible menace. The first threats are now fully active, pressing on your mind, testing endurance, and shaping behavior. The palace is no longer merely a place of ceremony, it is a participant in a living, breathing test of perception and survival. You feel the weight of the court's scrutiny, and the chilling truth becomes undeniable: the first true danger has arrived. And standing amidst the orchestrated movements, whispered words, and coordinated glances, you understand the terrifying reality: in Emperor Meiji's court, intrigue is deadly, and the first threats are only the beginning. Survival now depends on precision, composure, and the ability to navigate a labyrinth of invisible but lethal pressures. The first subtle threats have now sharpened into distinct, visible dangers. The palace that once seemed a stage of ceremonial elegance now feels like a trap, its beauty a mask for lethal intent. Every glance, every whisper, every movement of the courtiers carries potential peril. You realize that you are no longer merely observed, you are being actively targeted. The young nobleman approaches deliberately, his eyes locking onto yours with unflinching intensity. There is a precise weight to his gaze, as though it could measure your thoughts, your hesitation, your fear. You feel the first palpable sense of risk pressing on your chest. One small misstep, one misjudged reaction, could trigger consequences far beyond anything you have imagined. The noblewoman glides past, her silk robes whispering softly, but her eyes are sharp, calculating, predatory. She leans to whisper to a companion, he must falter, any sign of weakness will be exposed. The words are subtle, yet the intent is unmistakable. The first threats are no longer latent, they are deliberate, coordinated, and designed to manipulate perception and provoke error. A ceremonial tray passes near you, carried flawlessly by a page. Courtiers shift subtly around it, creating a moving frame of influence. Even a minor twitch of your fingers, a barely noticeable change in stance, can be interpreted, catalogued, and used against you. The palace itself seems to manipulate your focus, every object, movement, and echo contributing to the web of threat. The aide leans in, voice tense but controlled, the threats are now visible. One mistake, one hesitation, will be amplified. Observe carefully, act with precision, maintain composure. You nod, forcing calm into every fiber of your being, aware that survival now depends on careful calculation, anticipation, and control under pressure. Across the hall, a ripple of coordinated signals moves through the courtiers. The young nobleman tilts his head, the noblewoman responds subtly, and others adjust in near-perfect synchronization. You feel the palace closing in, shaping your reactions, guiding your movements, and amplifying the stakes. The first threats are now unmistakable, they are active, deliberate, and pressing. Your mind races, evaluating options. Speak, remain silent, bow slightly, shift posture. Every decision carries weight. The palace magnifies even minor errors, and the first visible threats are actively shaping perception, isolating you, and testing your ability to endure. The situation is no longer theoretical, the palace has become a minefield, each subtle misstep capable of triggering lasting consequences. The noblewoman leans closer, whispering again, her eyes fixed on you with quiet intensity. You sense the calculated nature of the palace's scrutiny. Every reaction you produce is now a signal, every hesitation a potential vulnerability. The first threats have become active agents, manipulating perception, shaping the narrative of your presence, and preparing the stage for even more dangerous actions. Time stretches, each second weighted with pressure. The first threats are now undeniable, pressing upon you, dictating reactions, and shaping the court's perception. The palace is no longer simply a backdrop, it is an active participant in your trial. You grasp the terrifying reality, in Emperor Meiji's court, the first visible dangers are only the beginning, and survival requires mastery of perception, anticipation, and subtlety. And standing amid the coordinated glances, whispered warnings, and subtle manipulations, you realize the unflinching truth, the court is no longer a place of ritual and etiquette, it is a living instrument of power, and you are at its mercy. The threats are no longer distant, they have become personal. The subtle manipulations and orchestrated observations now bear direct consequences. Every movement you make, every blink, every shift in posture, is scrutinized and interpreted, and the palace seems to respond, amplifying even the smallest misstep. The danger is no longer abstract, it is real, immediate, and suffocating. The young nobleman steps closer, his presence commanding attention. His eyes pierce yours, unrelenting, measuring not only etiquette but intent. You feel a weight pressing on your shoulders, a silent threat in the air. Any minor hesitation, any fraction of doubt, could now spark whispered judgments that ripple through the entire court. Survival demands that you remain perfectly composed under this relentless scrutiny. The noblewoman moves beside him, her silk robes flowing like water yet her movements deliberate and calculating. Her whisper to a companion cuts through the subtle tension, he must show his true self, any falter, you hear only fragments, but the implication is clear, the first personal dangers are unfolding. The palace itself orchestrates these threats, shaping perception and provoking reaction with lethal precision. A ceremonial object passes near you, carried with flawless poise by a page. Courtiers shift imperceptibly around it, creating a living frame that tests your awareness, patience, and judgment. Even minor gestures, a tremor in your hands, a subtle shift in weight, can be interpreted, magnified, and used to isolate or discredit you. The palace is now an active participant, manipulating reality to observe your resilience. The aide leans close, voice tense, the danger is immediate. Every reaction is noted. One misstep, one sign of uncertainty, will escalate the consequences. Endurance, precision, and anticipation are your only defenses. You nod, forcing calm, your heart hammering. The palace's mechanisms of observation and manipulation are no longer subtle, they now bear down upon you, testing every fiber of your being. Across the hall, the ripple of coordinated signals among the courtiers grows stronger. The young nobleman tilts his head, the noblewoman responds, others shift ever so slightly. You are at the center of a web of influence, a living network of observation designed to provoke error, manipulate perception, and magnify the stakes. The first personal consequences are now active. Your mind races. Speak, remain silent, bow, shift posture, adjust breathing. Every action carries risk. The palace magnifies even minor errors, and the first direct threats are shaping the court's perception, isolating you subtly, and testing your ability to endure under pressure. This is no longer a theoretical trial, it is a lived reality, and the palace is both judge and instrument of consequence. The noblewoman leans forward, whispering to her companion once more, her eyes locked on you with calculated intensity. You sense that the first personal threats are now intertwined with social perception. Every move you make, every expression, every subtle shift is a test, and the palace itself dictates the parameters of survival. Time stretches, each second weighted with invisible menace. The first personal consequences are now undeniable, pressing on your mind and body, shaping behavior, and defining the fragile line between survival and failure. You understand the terrifying truth, in Emperor Meiji's court, the threats are relentless, subtle, and deadly, and they are now aimed squarely at you. And standing amidst the orchestrated glances, whispered warnings, and subtle manipulations, you grasp the unflinching reality, the court is no longer merely a place of ritual and observation, it is a living, breathing instrument of power, and you are at its center, where one misstep could mean ruin. The palace's subtle pressures have now escalated into undeniable danger. The first personal threats have grown into active tests of survival, and you can feel the full weight of the court bearing down upon you. Every glance, every whisper, every slight movement is calculated to provoke a reaction, and the stakes are no longer abstract, they are immediate, tangible, and potentially ruinous. The young nobleman approaches with deliberate poise, his eyes fixed on you like a blade. You feel the intensity of his gaze pressing on your mind, measuring every hesitation, every micro-expression. One poorly judged movement, one fractional lapse in composure, could trigger a chain reaction of judgment, rumor, and subtle sabotage. The palace itself has become an instrument of pressure, and survival demands absolute precision. The noblewoman glides past, her robes whispering softly against the polished floor, yet her presence is charged with calculated intent. She leans toward a companion, whispering just enough for the trained ear, any sign of weakness, he must reveal himself. Her words are not idle, they are part of a coordinated strategy to manipulate perception, provoke error, and test endurance. The first personal threats have matured into orchestrated danger. A ceremonial tray passes near you, carried with flawless control by a page. Courtiers subtly adjust their positions around it, forming a living frame that channels your attention and tests your composure. Even inaction is dangerous, the palace interprets every hesitation, every shift in posture, every micro-expression as evidence to be weighed, recorded, and acted upon. The aide leans in, voice urgent, the stakes are higher now. Every reaction is noted. One misstep, one tremor, one lapse in judgment, and the consequences will escalate. Anticipate, observe, and respond with absolute precision. You nod, forcing calm over panic. Your mind races, calculating every possible action, every potential interpretation, every subtle signal. The palace is now an active participant in the test of survival. Across the hall, coordinated signals ripple through the courtiers. The young nobleman tilts his head, the noblewoman responds, others shift subtly in synchronization. You realize that the web of influence surrounding you is both precise and adaptive, capable of exploiting even the smallest weakness. The first personal threats have transformed into active pressure, guiding your behavior and amplifying the consequences of every minor error. Your mind spins through possible responses. Speak cautiously, remain silent, bow, shift weight slightly. Every choice is fraught with risk. Even a minor misjudgment could spiral into scandal, isolation, or public embarrassment. The palace magnifies errors, turning small lapses into enduring liabilities. The first personal threats are now shaping the court's perception, testing your endurance, and pressuring you toward perfection. The noblewoman leans closer, whispering again, her gaze sharp and deliberate. You sense that these threats are no longer abstract, they are active mechanisms of influence, manipulating perception, provoking reactions, and determining your place within the palace hierarchy. Every micro-expression, every subtle gesture, every heartbeat is a factor in the unfolding drama. Time stretches, heavy with tension. The first personal consequences are now unmistakable, pressing on your mind and body, shaping behavior, and dictating survival. The palace is no longer merely a backdrop, it is an active participant, orchestrating the trial with lethal precision. The stakes have escalated, and one misstep could spell social, political, or even physical peril. And standing amidst the orchestrated glances, whispered warnings, and precise manipulations, you grasp the unflinching truth: in Emperor Meiji's court, the first personal threats were only the beginning. Survival now demands mastery of anticipation, perception, and composure in a living labyrinth of intrigue and danger. The subtle manipulations, the whispered threats, and the orchestrated observations have now reached their apex. The palace has become a living battlefield of influence, and you stand at its center, the focal point of every gaze, every whisper, every calculated movement. The first personal threats have matured into a peak of intrigue where the margin for error is vanishingly small. The young nobleman approaches, his movements deliberate, almost predatory. His eyes lock onto yours with a precision that makes your blood run cold. Every hesitation, every micro-expression, every flicker of doubt is amplified, observed, and interpreted. The palace itself seems to bend around his presence, orchestrating the reactions of others, guiding perception, and escalating tension. The noblewoman glides past, her presence a controlled force. Her silk robes whisper softly, but her gaze cuts with calculated intent. She leans toward a companion, whispering a phrase just audible enough for trained ears: watch closely, one falter and all is revealed. You feel the first true sting of imminent danger, a threat that is no longer abstract but fully real. The palace is a living trap, and you are at its center. A ceremonial object passes by, carried flawlessly by a page. Courtiers subtly reposition themselves, creating a moving frame that directs attention and tests endurance. Every twitch of your fingers, every shift of weight, every controlled breath is now a potential signal, capable of being exploited. The first threats have evolved into an active, omnipresent force, manipulating your reality and shaping the court's perception. The aide leans close, voice tight with urgency: the intrigue has peaked. Every action, every blink, every gesture is under scrutiny. One mistake now could trigger consequences beyond your control. Anticipate, respond with precision, and maintain composure. You nod, forcing your mind and body into careful control, aware that the stakes are higher than ever before. Across the hall, coordinated signals ripple through the courtiers. The young nobleman tilts his head slightly, the noblewoman responds in perfect synchronization, others shift their positions with imperceptible timing. The web of influence around you is now a living organism, adaptive and precise, capable of exploiting even the smallest weakness. The first personal threats have evolved into a peak of active danger. Your mind races, calculating every possible move. Speak, remain silent, bow, shift posture. Each choice carries extreme risk. Even a minor misjudgment could spiral into social, political, or personal peril. The palace amplifies errors and transforms subtle lapses into significant liabilities. The intrigue has become a trap, and one misstep could seal your fate. The noblewoman leans forward, whispering again, her eyes locked on yours with lethal intent. You feel the palace itself guiding perception, orchestrating provocation, and testing endurance. Every micro-expression, every subtle gesture, every beat of your heart is a factor in the court's living calculation. Time stretches, weighted with invisible menace. The first personal threats are no longer distant, they are immediate, pressing, and unrelenting. You understand the unflinching truth: the court is now a fully realized instrument of power, and you are caught in its center. Every breath, every movement, every thought could be your undoing. And standing amidst the orchestrated glances, whispered warnings, and precise manipulations, you grasp the terrifying reality: in Emperor Meiji's court, the peak of intrigue is lethal, and survival demands mastery of anticipation, perception, and composure against forces that are as invisible as they are deadly. The peak of intrigue has passed, but its consequences are now cascading. Every subtle threat, every orchestrated glance, every whispered word has left its mark, and you feel the palace closing in with relentless precision. The danger is no longer theoretical, it is immediate, personal, and suffocating. Survival now teeters on the edge of perception and composure. The young nobleman steps forward, his gaze unyielding. Every micro-expression of yours is magnified, weighed, and recorded. You feel a tension coiling around your body, a pressure that turns your own instincts against you. One poorly judged gesture, one hesitation, one misaligned word could trigger a ripple that will extend far beyond the immediate hall, altering perception, alliances, and your very position in the court. The noblewoman glides past with her characteristic grace, yet her eyes are sharp, calculating, and unflinching. She whispers to a companion, he must not falter, the slightest crack, you catch only fragments, but the thread is unmistakable. The palace now actively directs pressure toward you, forcing reactions, shaping perceptions, and testing your endurance under real, escalating danger. A ceremonial object passes near you, carried flawlessly by a page. Courtiers shift subtly around it, creating frames of influence that manipulate your attention and test your reactions. The palace itself has become a living force, orchestrating events to provoke error, magnify consequences, and evaluate your composure under stress. Even silence or stillness is no refuge, the environment interprets it, twisting in the web of intrigue surrounding you. The aide leans in, voice taut with urgency, the danger has reached its edge. Every blink, every movement, every breath is observed and interpreted. One misstep now could have cascading consequences. Remain vigilant, anticipate, and act with flawless precision. Your heart hammers as you force control over mind and body, aware that the first tangible consequences of the peak of intrigue are now imminent. Across the hall, subtle signals ripple through the courtiers. The young nobleman tilts his head, the noblewoman responds, others shift their postures with perfect timing. You realize the web of influence is now a living, adaptive network. It amplifies minor weaknesses and exploits hesitation. The first true dangers have begun to take shape, transforming subtle pressure into real, actionable threats. Your mind spins with choices. Speak, remain silent, bow, shift weight slightly. Each decision carries extreme risk. Even a minor misjudgment could cascade into social, political, or personal peril. The palace amplifies errors and uses them to shape perception and power dynamics. The edge of danger is now tangible, pressing on your nerves and dictating every micro-action. The noblewoman leans forward again, whispering to her companion, eyes fixed on you. You sense that the palace itself is orchestrating reality, your micro-expressions, your gestures, even your heartbeat are instruments in the court's living calculation. Every move must be precise, every decision deliberate, or the consequences will be swift and inescapable. Time stretches, heavy with tension. The first personal consequences of the peak intrigue are now fully active, pressing against your mind and body. The palace is no longer a setting, it is a participant, guiding perception, provoking reaction, and testing endurance. You understand, with chilling clarity, that one misstep could determine your survival. And standing amidst orchestrated glances, whispered warnings, and subtle manipulations, you grasp the unflinching truth: in Emperor Meiji's court, danger is omnipresent, perception is lethal, and survival requires mastery over the invisible but deadly forces that flow relentlessly around you. The palace has shifted from subtle menace to direct trial. Every gaze, every whisper, every orchestrated gesture of the courtiers now converges upon you. The first consequences, the personal threats, and the peak of intrigue have led to this moment, the ultimate test of survival in Emperor Meiji's court. One misstep, one hesitation, one lapse in perception, and the delicate balance of your life and position could shatter irreparably. The young nobleman approaches with calm yet calculated precision. His eyes lock onto yours, sharp and unyielding. You can feel the full weight of his scrutiny pressing against your mind, a silent force testing every instinct, every thought, every subtle movement. The palace itself seems to amplify his presence, turning observation into pressure, and pressure into a crucible. The noblewoman glides past, her movements flawless, her eyes glinting with calculated intent. She whispers softly to a companion, "The final test. Now all is revealed." Her words carry the weight of inevitability. You realize that the palace has transformed into a living labyrinth of perception, every step, every motion, every breath now measured against invisible but exacting standards. A ceremonial object passes close by, carried with flawless poise. Courtiers shift subtly, creating a moving frame of influence designed to observe and provoke. Every micro-expression, every slight movement, every controlled inhalation and exhalation is under scrutiny. Even the smallest misjudgment could be interpreted as weakness, disrespect, or failure, and the first tangible consequences have become decisive. The aide leans in, voice tense. This is the final test. Every movement, every glance, every thought is under scrutiny. One mistake now could determine everything. Maintain absolute composure. Anticipate. Execute with precision. You take a deep, controlled breath, forcing your mind into clarity and your body into perfect stillness. The survival of both reputation and life now depends on flawless execution. Across the hall, the web of coordinated observation tightens. The young nobleman tilts his head ever so slightly, the noblewoman responds in perfect synchronization, others shift imperceptibly. The palace itself participates in the orchestration, guiding reactions, amplifying errors, and shaping perception. You realize that every action has now reached maximum consequence, the subtle forces of intrigue are fully active and lethal in their precision. Your mind calculates, weighing every possible action. Speak carefully, remain silent, bow slightly, adjust posture minutely. Every microdecision carries weight beyond imagination. Even a fleeting hesitation could spark whispers, rumors, or social ruin. The court amplifies minor mistakes into enduring consequences, and the invisible threads of danger now reach their peak. The noblewoman leans closer, whispering one last phrase, her gaze piercing, "All is revealed, only those who endure will remain." You understand that this is the culmination of every threat, every manipulation, every subtle test. The palace is a living instrument of power, and you are at the center, measured, tested, and pushed to your utmost limits. Time stretches, each second dense with tension. The first personal consequences, the orchestrated intrigues, and the peak threats are now fully realized. You feel the crushing weight of observation, influence, and danger pressing against your mind and body. Every motion, every breath, every choice is critical. And in that suspended, final moment, you comprehend the unyielding truth: to survive in Emperor Meiji's court, mere caution is not enough. Only through mastery of perception, anticipation, and composure can one navigate the lethal subtleties of power, intrigue, and human observation. The palace is both trial and executioner, and survival belongs solely to those who can read, react, and endure every invisible, deadly current flowing relentlessly around them. As the courtier's eyes converge and the whispers fade into a tense silence, you hold your breath, perfectly still, every nerve taut. The final test is not over until it is recorded in perception, and the court has judged you. In this moment, you are neither victor nor victim, you are fully alive, tested, and surviving, against the invisible yet deadly forces of the Emperor's court.